Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Mommy, tell me something about Daddy, Lucy kept asking her. Oh, there's nothing to tell about him. Annabelle looked at her. But why do all the girls have a daddy? I don't, she said. Why do you need him? If you knew who he was, you'd never go to him. Mom went into the kitchen. She sighed heavily and looked out the window. No, she never regretted that I was born, my daughter. But the one from whom and how it was, she often wondered. Annabelle finished school, went to the institute and left her home village. She really wanted to escape to the city, get a job there and have some significance. But her wish was given a 50-50 chance of coming true. Yes, she went to college. She studied well, graduated from it and got on distribution in education. At first the position was small, but later Annabelle grew to a good, solid position. Annabelle, can I meet you? Came up to her driver, who worked here too. Well, you're funny. She turned and laughed. What's so funny? Yes, I know your name, but nobody ever introduced us, and we never introduced ourselves to each other. Okay. Annabelle held out her hand to him and blushed. Well, that's better, he said, and shook her hand. Let's go out for ice cream tonight after work. Okay. Annabelle realized that the years were passing and someone was going to come into her life, and maybe it was Anthony. They started a relationship. Only then did the girl learn that Anthony himself came from a village just like her. His parents lived there. Please come with me, he told her when he invited her to his village. Do you realize I just got out of there? I've been scratching this place out with my teeth. And now I'm going back to the village. I don't understand it. Then Anthony's mom came up with a compromise. She said there was a bus from their village every day, so she could get up and go to her job. It was the only way Annabelle agreed to go to live in the village with Anthony. Don't worry, I've got a car. If anything, I won't take you away. Anthony supported her. They got married. The wedding was big and merry, as it usually happens in the village. The young people did not live 3 years. Annabelle's character was very difficult. Therefore, Anthony could not stand it. The young man himself said that they were getting a divorce. Annabelle didn't shed a single tear. She just packed her bags, went back to the city. They gave her a room in a communal apartment where she lived for a long time. Annabelle, how much work can you do? Let's go out, her friends told her. Why, come on, I haven't been anywhere for a long time. The girls went to the same cafe where she and Anthony used to eat ice cream. They sat there talking, but most of all they liked going to the bathhouse. The public bathhouse was open 3 days at the end of the week, so the girls would go on Saturday mornings. They'd get together as a group. First they bathed, and after that they went to the buffet, where some dishes were served. But they'd have a glass of beer. There were also various young people to chat with. The atmosphere was relaxed, so Annabelle often met young people. It had been several years since she and Anthony had broken up, and she hadn't found anyone. My son's wedding is today. Will you come? Will you help? Her sister asked. Of course, she could have just called. She didn't have to come. Annabelle wondered why she doubted her. Her nephew's wedding was as big an event in her life as it was for her mother. They'd always been together. He'd grown up before her eyes. Like all weddings, it was a fun one. It took a long time for the guests to disperse, and when they did, it took Annabelle and her sister a long time to clear the tables and wash the dishes. She returned home in the morning. She walked through her town and suddenly saw a man lying on a bench. She went up to him and pushed him. He moaned something. Man, wake up, you're freezing, Annabelle said to him. It was summer, but the nights were already chilly. Give me a break, he only mouthed to her and tugged her shoulder. Man, come on, I'll walk you home, the woman insisted. Ah, why are you bothering me? The man turned on his other side. Please, I can't leave you here. She had already begged him. He sat down on the bench. Give me your hand, I'll help you. She hated that he was having fun at night, too. I don't need anyone's help. I'll get there myself. He scowled, but Annabelle wasn't about to back down. She realized he was an okay man. There was nothing to be afraid of. The woman sat down next to him on the bench. "If you're not going anywhere, I'll sit here with you," she told him. "Sit? Who's stopping you?" He could hear that he felt very bad. "Let's go to my place and I'll feed you some okroshka," Annabelle offered him. "Don't you have beer at home?" "Yes," she smiled. "I bought a bottle last weekend for a reason." "Come on, let's go." He stood up, staggered, and looked at her. "My name's Annabelle," the woman said cheerfully. "Me, Joe," he muttered back. So much for getting to know each other. She wanted to take him under her arm, but he gave her such a look that Annabelle changed her mind. They walked up to the house where the woman lived, went upstairs, entered the apartment. "What was that? A communal or something?" Joe asked. "And what difference does it make where you drink beer?" Annabelle was a little offended. "All right, let's go, come on." He couldn't wait to drink the life-giving moisture. They went into the room. It was clean. After that, the woman quickly set the table. There was a lot of stuff. Salads, pies, and of course, the coveted bottle. "What do you do?" Annabelle sat down across from her new acquaintance. "I just work for myself." He took a big sip and cheered up. "I work too." She thought he was going to ask where and by whom, but he wasn't interested. "And why are you sleeping on the bench that you're not at home?" She didn't know what else to talk to him about. "Yes, I do, but I didn't get there." He spoke honestly. "I see." She got up and went to the window. "Well, what do you understand?" He turned and looked at her over his shoulder. "Let's go with me in the morning." Annabelle suddenly became lively. "Where to?" "To the wedding?" The thought had just occurred to her. That's the news. He imagined how good it would be for him. A sea of booze, appetizers. She looked at the man. "I should have put something on him." "Come on." He got tipsy and smiled. "All right then." She walked over to the closet, opening it. Some things were left over from her husband. "Joe, wash up and try these on." Annabelle found a sweater, pants, all of which were given to Joe. He went to the bathroom and came back a decent man. It was possible to get some sleep, but no sleep came. Emotions were bubbling up inside. Annabelle was sure that any man could be fixed. She would do it. "Annabelle, who's that?" Her sister asked her. "Is that the husband-to-be?" "Well, I hope so," she whispered in her ear. "You left yesterday morning and there was no mention of a husband." The sister was surprised. "But today there is." She wouldn't say anything yet. "Oh, you've got to be kidding." Her relative patted her on the shoulder. "You should know how to do that." She winked at her. The second day passed noisily and cheerfully. Within a couple hours of starting, Joe was asleep at the table. He was exhausted. The woman stroked him on the head. "Not exhausted," said the grandmother who sat across from him. "Oh, be jealous." The woman looked at them in silence. "Yeah, you'll remember my words." Annabelle realized she couldn't carry Joe home, so she just laid him down on the chairs here for now. When it was over, she and her sister cleaned everything up and washed up. The man had recovered a little by now. "So let's go home." Annabelle stood in front of him. "Who are you?" He squinted. "Annabelle, how could you forget me? We came together." She sat down. "Yeah, sorry." He looked around at the empty tables. "We'll be home in a minute." She promised him. They left the building together and headed to the same address. They didn't forget to stop at the store on the way. "Come on, finish up. Go to the bathroom and we'll sleep," the woman said in the evening. "But I don't want to sleep with you." He looked at her. "Why?" She was surprised. "I don't know you," he shouted. "Well, how come? I'm Annabelle, you and I." She started talking. "Yes, I remember you tell me that all the time." "Well, then what?" She was already in bed. "Nothing." Spion got up and went out into the hallway. Annabelle lay there thinking about getting up to follow him, but she was afraid of scaring the man away even more. He came back, but he didn't go to her, but lay down on the small couch that stood by the window. The woman exhaled. At least this way, she still had him. She had to go to work in the morning. Annabelle started 3 hours before. She made breakfast, while humming something to herself. "Joe, wake up. I've made you so many delicious things," she said in an affectionate voice. "Quiet." He waved her off. "All right, I'll put it here." As soon as you wake up, eat, she cooed. Today she felt like flying to work. She smiled all day long. Her friends didn't understand what had happened to her. The always stern, silent Annabelle blossomed and smelled. Girls, I'll leave a little early, she told her colleagues and left the office. Have you found a man for yourself? They look good. Annabelle was already flying home at that moment. She went to the store, bought some groceries. She wanted to make dinner for the man. When she got there, he was still lying on the same couch. Did you get up? She was surprised. Yes, my head hurts, he admitted to her. Now I'll give you a pill, she fussed. It took half an hour for the medicine to kick in. In that time, Annabelle had already prepared the salad and boiled the meat to make a rich broth. Here, Joe, have some. She set a plate of salad in front of him. Isn't there anything liquid? He asked. She looked out into the hallway. They were sitting at the table eating. Annabelle kept putting food on his plate. Oh, thank you, I'm full. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the refrigerator. There's no beer today. She guessed what he wanted. All right. He waved his hand and went and plopped down on the couch again. Annabelle realized he wasn't going anywhere, so she calmed down a little. She bought him things. The two of them went everywhere together. You found a man on the street. Her sister laughed at her. Be quiet so Joe doesn't hear. Annabelle, you'd think he didn't realize it himself. The woman was sure of it. Annabelle and Joe had been living together for 6 months. She was glad to finally have a man in her life. She had dressed him, put his shoes on, washed him, fed him, and now he looked very different from the first time they met. Joe was an appliance repairman. His hands were golden. A lot of people came to him. He was good at his job. Joe, I think we're about to have a little one. I came home one day, Annabelle. We've got grandchildren to raise, and you're talking about kids. He was looking at her like she was a ghost. Honey, but I want a baby so badly. She sat next to him. I don't know how we're going to handle it. He scratched the back of his head. Annabelle didn't understand how this had happened. She'd been using protection, also, and it had led her to think that, to be so sure, God wanted them to have a baby. In time, Joe came to terms with the idea. He didn't mind babysitting himself, but with someone else's baby, not his own. Why don't you want me to meet your mom? She'd been asking him for months. It's not worth it, he answered sadly. Then tell her yourself that she's going to be a grandmother soon, the woman insisted. When the time comes, I'll tell her. It was obvious that he didn't want to talk about it. All right, I won't bother with it anymore. It was useless to prove anything. Annabelle hadn't gone on maternity leave yet. She was sitting at work when her stomach abruptly grabbed. What? Scared young girl who recently came to their department. Call an ambulance. The woman curled up at her desk. Everything was done quickly. The paramedics took Annabelle to the hospital. She had gone into premature labor. The girl was born very small, painful. The mother was crying. She looked at her baby. She felt so sorry for Lucy. Don't be upset. Everything's going to be all right. Joe was saying to her through the window of the room. I know, but look at her. Annabelle lamented, showing him a small package. A few weeks in the hospital, and then various other treatments. A year, mother and baby girl didn't get out of the hospital after. Everything seemed to normalize. Joe, my daughter, is healthy and I'll probably go to work, she told her husband. They lived like that in her room in the communal house. His earnings were not enough for much. Okay, I'm staying home anyway, the man agreed. So Lucy stayed with her father and her mother started working. Everyone around wondered where she found such a man. He works at home, helps with his daughter, and he doesn't drink at all. Annabelle was proud of herself for making it work. Well, Lucy, let's go. I'll introduce you to your grandmother. Her father took her in his arms. The girl looked at him with blue eyes and smiled. They went outside. Since Joe started living with Annabelle, they had never met his mother. Hi, he walked into the apartment where he had spent so much time. Son, where have you been? I thought I'd lost you. The mother came out of the kitchen and froze. I met a woman. We lived together. He put Lucy on the floor. She looked at her grandmother. And who is this? Grandma said in a completely different voice. He took off his jacket and went into the room. The girl ran after him. What daughter? Why didn't you meet her mother? asked the mother sternly. Oh, don't start, sighed the man. How dare you do something without my knowledge? Although the woman was a decent age, but she was still strict and bossy. If you don't stop now, I'll just get up and walk out and you'll never see me again. He sat back in his chair and didn't even lift his head. Well, go away if you thought I was going to take the baby, then don't wait. Joe knew that this could be the end of it. He didn't argue. He put on Lucy's cloak and cap buttoned up, his boots, took his jacket, and they left. Baba, Lucy said in the evening. Who's the broad? She turned to Joe. Oh, never mind. He didn't want to bring it up. No, you tell me. Yeah, they went to see my mother today. That's all. I see. But she didn't stay in the dark for long. When Lucy was 2 years old, Joe's mother came to the house. Open up. Annabelle asked when she heard the doorbell ring. Within moments, an elderly woman stood in the room. Hello. Annabelle looked up at her. Ah, so that's what she was like. Standing, hands in her mother's side. Why did you come? Joe was ashamed. So listen here, my dear. The woman looked at Annabelle. You're not going to talk to me like that. Oh, what are you talking about? Leslie gasped with indignation. That's what I say. Leave my house. She turned her back to her daughter and continued her lessons with her. You'll be sorry. The mother looked at her son and walked out, and she slammed the door so hard that it almost flew off the saw. What's going on? Annabelle turned to Joe. Nothing, I told you. He went back to sleep. The next day, Annabelle came home. She had gotten a call from the daycare saying they hadn't picked up her daughter and she was pissed. But there was no one to cuss at. Joe was asleep and there were several empty bottles on the table. What did you do? She shoved him in the back and he turned around. I've done so much for you and you did this to me. Crying and picking up trash from the table was a woman. She'd slept with her daughter that day, thinking it would come to Joe and he'd settle down. But it didn't. The next day, and then for another week, the man just poured himself into himself without restraint. Can't go on like this. Either you quit drinking or you leave. She gave me an ultimatum. Okay. Just answered. He stood up, grabbed his tool case and walked out of the apartment. Annabelle stood like that, proud, independent. She was sure he wasn't going anywhere. It was warm and nourishing, and surely he would come back. But Joe was gone forever. How many nights the woman cried, how many times she told herself she was wrong, but nothing could be changed. Joe came back to his mother. She was glad. She knew for sure this was the way it was going to be. Now it was her turn to make sure he didn't drink or do anything stupid. The man did the same thing. There were more orders, and it was no longer convenient to take people at home. He was thinking of getting his own place. Joe, come here. One night he heard from his mother's room, and he was sitting at the bottle again. Get up, you've got to, he said nervously. I can't help me. The woman called out to him. I can't either. He poured himself another shot. In the morning, when he woke up, he saw his mother lying in a strange position. He approached and immediately pulled away. The woman was dead. She was taken away, and the son went to the store again to douse the grief and guilt he thought lay upon him. If he had gotten up in the night and helped her, none of this would have happened. He only showed up when he had to be buried. Thanks to the neighbors for doing everything for him. He only gave money. But how could it be? He lamented in the evening, sitting in front of her picture. From that moment on, Joe began to sing black. Nothing could stop him anymore. He just didn't want to live. Joe, what's the matter with you? A friend met him on the street when he went to get his next fix. And Tony looked up at him. It's all right. I thought you wanted to start a business, start something of your own. He remembered their last conversation. Yeah, I'm about to inherit. I'll figure something out. That's what the man said. 6 months of heavy drinking had taken its toll. When all the documents were in hand, Joe immediately put the apartment for sale. The buyers came quickly. He had no regrets. He had a little house in the suburbs. It was a nice place to live. I need to rent a place. He called from an ad. All right, come look at it. The tenant would agree. Joe put up the money, but he still had money left over. Tony, come and see me. We'll talk about my first step to the big money. They laughed into the phone. All right, wait for me. In the evening, his friend often came to see him. They would sit and discuss what Joe would do and how he would do it. He just shrugged his shoulders. Basically, nothing would change, but people would bring their equipment to a different place than to his house. The cottage, as he used to call the cabin he now lived in, was a lot of hassle. Here they didn't heat the radiators. You had to fire up the stove. And to do that you had to have wood. "Hello, neighbor." He went out into the yard. "Yes, don't you take care of yourself?" He leaned back. "Listen, do you have some wood?" There was nowhere to go, he ordered, but when they will bring them. Sure, why not help a good man? He brought him some logs on a cart. "Come and visit," the owner invited him. Today they were celebrating the housewarming. More and more friends came. There was nothing to do about work. Money melted like snow in the sun. "Who's that beautiful girl who brought you here?" A neighbor once came with a woman. "Come in." The owner was always happy to have guests. "I'm Casey," introduced herself in a husky voice. "I'm Joe," he nodded. "Do you live alone?" She looked over. "Yeah," he nodded and poured another round. That night, Casey stayed the night. She just couldn't go anymore. No one minded. "Stay if you want to," said Joe to her in the morning. He still went to work sometimes. Rent was paid a year in advance, so nobody kicked him out. "I'll take it and stay." The woman smiled with her toothless mouth. They began to live together. They had plenty of friends and they welcomed them all. "Hey, Joe, let's sell your shack and live at my place," Casey said. "Do you have an apartment?" He was surprised. "What did you think?" "A one-bedroom." She threw a thumbs up. "Just take care of everything yourself." He didn't want to get into these debris. The woman was glad he counted her in. They did it quickly. The cabin was sold for next to nothing. They drove back to town. Here Joe was not far from his workplace. He would go out in the morning to do something and then come back. And the fun would begin again. Mother, stop drinking, get a job, do something. One day a young man came to them, who turned out to be Casey's son. "You'll teach me more about life." She wrinkled her nose. "If you don't listen, I'll take everything away from you," he threatened. "Oh, what can you do?" Laughed at him. "At least I'll kick you out of the apartment," said the guy calmly. "You will not dare." The woman was sure of herself. "You'll see. I'll give you a month to fix it." He's out. Is this his apartment? Joe didn't understand. "Yes, my father gave it to him, but he doesn't live in this town. So I moved in here," Casey said sadly. "Calm down. He's not going to do anything." She wanted to close the subject, but her son kept his promise. He came exactly 1 month later. An apartment no one had ever cleaned. It was so cluttered, it looked like it would never be cleaned again. "I see you didn't take my advice." My son was standing in the hallway. He was disgusted to even touch anything. "What up, who's here?" Casey heard me and came up to the bed. "So pack your stuff and get out of here." He wasn't kidding. "And if you're not, then what?" Became a mother, and she shook a little. "Otherwise, I call the police. Let them take you out." He was adamant. "Son, come on, I'm your mom," changed her tone. "It's none of my business. If you want to drink, do it outside. Tell your roommate the same thing." He waited. Casey turned and looked at Joe. There was nothing to do. They packed up some junk and went out. "Mind you, I'll change the locks and you won't get in here again." He held up his hand for the woman to give him the key. "Oh, choke on it," she told him. "So where to now?" Joe looked at Casey. "Well, to your place of work." She thought she'd gotten out of it. "No way. The lease is ending soon." He shook his head, himself already thinking he needed to move his stuff out. They went to the very neighbor who had once introduced Joe to Casey. "Oh, come on. I have a family. I can't take you in." He's got his hands full. "This is what we're in for." The woman sat down on a log that was standing there. "Let's go." The man didn't wait. He knew Tony wouldn't refuse him. And so it was. The friend gave them the keys to his garden shed. That's where they went. Everything was fine here, but the city was far away and there was no heating. "We'd have to get a stove somewhere." Casey shrank back. "Yeah, in the meantime." He took out a big iron basin, put some twigs in it, and made a fire in the cabin. From then on, Joe and Casey were vagabonds walking into town, scavenging for whatever they could get. Maybe we should get a job, the man asked her. Where would they take us? She wondered. But there were many offers, such as picking potatoes, plucking geese and chickens, and many other things. That's where they went. The money they earned was not much, but they had enough to drink. They found people who also lived in a house like other people. It was a good-looking bunch, all ragged and dirty but happy. Annabelle, when her husband left, couldn't get over it for a long time. At first, she wanted to find him, but then she changed her mind. When she imagined meeting his mom, she didn't want to. Why don't you ever talk about Daddy? Lucy didn't understand. What do you want to hear? How I picked him up on the street. Tears came to her eyes. Is it true? Made Big Eye's 6-year-old girl. Yes, the mother did not hide anything. I thought Aunt Nanny had made it all up. Lucy sat down next to her mom and hugged her. Okay, enough with the sad stuff. Annabelle stood up and wiped away a tear that had not rolled down from her eyes. What was he like? Her daughter didn't want to end this conversation. Bad. The woman really didn't want to talk about it. I do not believe you. Was beginning to cry the girl. Then do not ask. Think as you know. Went to the kitchen Annabelle, but Lucy could not talk about it. At the daycare center, dads came to pick up the kids. She didn't have one at all. She made up stories about him. When the girls in the group bragged about their dads, she had nothing to say. Lucy, you're going to first grade soon. Let's think about it, her mother said. Okay, involuntarily said the girl. Although this topic was interesting to her, she had long dreamed of school, constantly playing with her toys, teaching them. Lucy grew up bright. She was interested in many things, learned to read and write early. Annabelle was happy for her daughter. Mom, we need to talk. Lucy was already in 5th grade. What, about him again? The woman rolled her eyes. Why are you doing this? We had to write an essay about our parents, and I know a lot about you, but nothing about Dad. The girl couldn't understand why her mother couldn't tell her anything. All right, listen. He was a test pilot. He went on a mission one day and never came back. She wouldn't look at her daughter. But that's not true. I knew it, Lucy. But it's all right for an essay you're writing. She got up again and left the room. Annabelle kept hoping she'd see someone else, but she couldn't meet anyone. She could go alone to a cafe, see people she knew there, sit with them. Acquaintances were, but beyond that she did not want anything then. The woman came up with another way. She came to the same cafe, sat alone. What if someone sits down? But that didn't work either. Her friends introduced her to men she didn't like. Like that, when her daughter was in 7th grade, they went together to some event at the House of Culture. There were 2 homeless men sitting outside one of the stores. Ew, how can you live like that? Lucy turned away from them when they started to ask them for something. Let's go. Hurry up. Annabelle hurried her along. She saw that it was Joe with some woman and it became so unpleasant, but the rude woman didn't dare say anything. Lucy grew up beautiful. Her mother tried to make sure she had everything. She bought her new dresses, shoes if necessary. She paid for her school fees. But she suffered from the fact that she had no companion in life. Mom, why are you always so sad? Lucy was already a senior in high school. It's okay, daughter. She stroked her head. I need to think about where I'm going to go. That question was a sore subject right now. The girl knew that Annabelle wouldn't be able to pull it off if she went somewhere else, and she didn't want to go to the local school. Are you thinking of going somewhere else? The woman kept asking that question. Lately, she began to feel very bad. Everything hurt. Well, why not? Of course, Lucy wanted more. What if something happens to me? Her mother used to raise her voice at her. What could happen to you? Look at you. How young you are and how full of strength you are. The daughter was sure of it. But when Lucy was in the 11th grade, Annabelle went to bed. Lately, she had been coughing a lot. Her daughter had tried to send her to the hospital, but the woman had balked. She treated herself with some herbs, tinctures, and when it got really bad, she had to call the doctors. Why didn't you come before? The doctor looked at the fluorogram. I thought it would go away on its own. She realized she delayed going to the doctor. I don't think there's anything we can do about it. He wasn't being sly. How long do I have left? She asked him a question. A year, maybe a little less. He made some kind of note. Right now, Annabelle was getting agitated. She realized her daughter would be alone and she didn't want that. So she started going to the doctors, but they were just throwing up their hands. Then she started going to grandmothers who had some kind of power, which didn't help much either. Mom sat by her bedside. "Daughter, I'm sorry, Lucy," cried the woman. "For what? Please don't be sick." Tears were flowing from the girl's eyes too. "Lucy, if I'm gone, you know where the money is," she said with a gasp. Her cough was choking her. "No, don't say that." She buried her face in her mother's hands. "Cry, don't cry." But the disease was progressing. Annabelle wouldn't leave the house. She just couldn't. Lucy did everything for her. Lucy finished 11th grade. And just like Annabelle wanted, she went to the local high school just to be with her mom. Every minute was precious, so she didn't go anywhere for days and nights sitting by her bed. "He's leaving," pulled Annabelle's hands as she was delirious. But the daughter no longer paid any attention to it. "Mommy, I love you." Kissing her, she covered her with a blanket. "Either you stop drinking or you leave," shouted the woman from the room. "Don't go," Lucy whispered when she saw Annabelle wasn't well. Annabelle died when Lucy was finishing her freshman year. There had been so many tears, so many worries. When the girl returned from the cemetery, the room was empty and quiet. Lucy lay down on the bed. She sobbed. How could she be alone now? What to do? She had to keep studying, and Lucy gathered her will into a fist. She realized that she had promised this mother couldn't do anything else. She had to do something to keep her mind off sad things. What to do? It was summer, school was coming to an end, and there were vacations. "Hello, I saw an advertisement that you have vacancies." She went to a cafe near their house. "Yes, we need a waitress and a dishwasher," the receptionist told her. "And I agree," immediately answered Lucy. "Well, and by whom?" specified the administrator. "If you can, then both." She wanted to exhaust herself and not think about anything. It would be very difficult. After the shift, the waiter's legs fall off, and there is still standing and washing dishes, said the employee of the cafe. "It's okay, I'll manage." Lucy was confident in her abilities. "I'll talk to the director. If he agrees, the position will go to you." "Thank you." Lucy said thank you and went home. The next day, she got a call telling her to come to work tonight. "Hi, tonight you'll just wash dishes. You'll know how it is. And tomorrow you'll go out as a waitress. If you can pull it off, then stay." Lily told her. She's the one who talked to her yesterday. "Thank you so much again." Lucy headed for the kitchen. There she quickly got to know everyone. She was shown what to do and how to do it. She said about her duties. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't hard either. The next day she said she was ready to work 2 jobs for the first time. No one was against it, so the girl started working. "Hello, my name is Lucy. What will you be ordering?" She approached the tables. She loved this job so much. First of all, talking to people. Secondly, the new faces every time. "Lucy, you're very good at everything." People respond to you with nothing but kind praise from her boss. At the end of the month, she got her paycheck for 2. And she added a little more as a bonus. Wow, she hadn't expected to get so much. That evening, she wanted some kind of celebration. She asked the girls in the kitchen to take over and went to the restaurant. Yes, she could have done it in her cafe, but she didn't want to infringe on the girls who worked with her. Greetings. She entered the spacious, beautiful room. "Hello." She looked at the young man who greeted her at the entrance. "Come on, I'll walk you to your table." He went forward. Lucy sat down. He pulled up a chair for her. Everything was so chic. After that, she ordered. She wanted something out of the ordinary. The girl asked for champagne. "And why is such a young, pretty girl sitting alone?" Turned to her a young man from the back table. He, too, was probably alone. "Why are you alone?" She laughed. "I have an hour to wait, and so I decided to pass it here." There was only a glass of juice on his table. "I thought I'd celebrate my first paycheck," Lucy confessed. "Wow, can I sit with you?" He stood up and took the juice in his hands. "Oh, yeah, sure." She was not at all against the company. The guy sat down. He looked at what the girl ordered and asked for the same. "And why are you repeating after me?" She didn't understand. You know, when I came here, I couldn't choose anything from the menu, and now I looked at your dishes and realized that I want the same thing. He looked her straight in the eye. Lucy didn't notice that he'd switched to you. I see. And the champagne? She raised her glass. No, I think I'll order some wine. What's your name? The girl became bolder under the influence of magic bubbles. Anthony. What's yours? He deliberately emphasized the last word. Lucy, she blushed. It's okay. At that moment, Anthony's order was brought to him. He raised a glass to the acquaintance and she supported. What do you do for a living? Started their conversation. I study, the girl answered. Me too. He looked at the entrance came another couple. Are you here too? She was surprised. I didn't want to waste time at school. I finished 9 grades and went to the local school. Strange. I've never seen you there. She was surprised, but there was nothing surprising about it. She hadn't had much time to study lately. She was taking care of her mom. Tears came to her eyes when she remembered that. What's wrong with you? Are you so upset because you didn't see me? He laughed. No, I remembered about my mom. She died recently. The girl took a napkin and blotted her tears. I'm sorry for your loss. Anthony tilted his head a little. Yeah, and it's okay. She assured him. They sat further, talking about their studies, about who was doing what. You've only got an hour to wait, and we've been here for 2. Oh, I forgot. You don't have to go anywhere. I'll be back in no time. Okay, I'll wait. She was sure of it, because time was still short, and she was in no hurry. Anthony took a quick step toward the exit. He was gone for about half an hour, and then he was sitting across from Lucy again. You're so fast. She smiled. Yes, all I had to do was pass on the information. He didn't go into detail. Come on to the meeting. Now it sounded like a toast from Lucy. It's a pleasure talking to you, the guy admitted. Probably as much as I do. She blushed again. They sat for a long time reminiscing. Who studied at school, what classes they went to. Lucy realized that this evening, apart from once, she had not remembered the dearest person at all. Let me call you a cab. The young man suggested to her as they were about to leave. Oh, that's all right. I live not far from here. She picked up her purse. Well then, I'll walk you. It seemed to him that they had known her all their lives. Good, Lucy was happy. Outside they talked too, and it turned out they had so much in common. They both loved skiing, putting together puzzles, doing lots of other things. Lucy, can I take you out again tomorrow? He really liked her. He didn't want to miss the opportunity to get to know her again. You know, I can't tomorrow. I have work. She stopped talking. So she can't the day after tomorrow, and then the day after that. Okay, write down my number. I will. He took the phone out of his jacket. See you tomorrow then. She stood outside her driveway until he went in his direction. There was a kind of euphoria inside today. The girl realized that she liked the guy and wanted him to come too. The next day. Hello, everyone. She arrived at work and went straight to the office of Lucy's boss. He was surprised. She was always so modest, never distracted him from his work. And now she showed up. Yes, Rocky, I can't do the dishes anymore. She was going to ask to be a waitress only. What? You didn't like the paycheck? No, I just met someone. I don't have time for meetings. I didn't want to cheat on this man either. Oh my God, you scared me. He sat back in his chair, so Lucy waited for an answer. Sure, but if the girls ask, you'll help them, won't you? Yes, you know me. The girl stood up and headed for the exit. Now she was waiting for a call from Anthony. He didn't call until the evening, and Lucy already thought that he changed his mind. What was all this for then? But a few minutes before the end of her shift, the phone did ring. I thought you weren't going to call me today. She said instead of greeting me. Sorry, I got a little carried away. I started making excuses. My shift's over. We can meet. She was standing there looking at her watch. I'll pick you up. He hung up. Guy showed up with flowers. It was unexpected and pleasant. He touched his cheek to her cheek and goosebumps ran down Lucy's back. Well, where shall we go? He asked. Let's go to the abandoned boathouse, she suggested. All right. And they went there on foot that evening. They talked a lot again. They never ceased to be amazed at how alike they were. You said your mom didn't, but who are you with now? Anthony wanted to ask that yesterday, but didn't dare. I'm alone. The girl felt sad all at once. Oh, well, that's good. That's no good. She stared at him. How could he say that? No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. He started gesturing with his hands. Well, what then? She folded her arms across her chest and waited for an answer. It's just that I live with my parents and you're like this, explained he. And in that sense. Sure, yeah, sorry again. He moved closer to her and hugged her. Lucy tensed. Okay. She jumped to the ground and shook off her skirt. Where are you going? He didn't understand. Come on. She beckoned the boy to follow her. Well, I'll follow you to the ends of the earth. He was already standing on earth. They came to the water's edge. Do you want me to confess something to you? She looked out at the blue water. But if you want me to. He put his arms around her again. When I was in school, in junior high, me and the boys used to come here a lot. Those who had fathers would get together as a family on weekends and go boating. I didn't have a dad. I was so jealous of those who were in the boats. Anthony saw Lucy's eyes glisten. Don't cry. Do you want me to take you for a ride? He started looking around, if there was any boat left here, but there was nothing around, just old scattered boards. I do. She turned to him. I promise you that as soon as this week you'll be sitting in a boat and bobbing in the waves. He was so close to her, he couldn't resist kissing her. I believe you, she whispered. They stood for a while longer and then walked home. Why don't you come in? Lucy asked the guy in the driveway. Would that be convenient? He didn't know what to do. Well, you know I live alone. She reminded him. So, in a communal apartment and neighbors? What about the neighbors? I have my life. They have theirs. They entered the entrance, then went up to the apartment. How did you get along here? Anthony was curious. He was from a well-to-do family. They lived in a spacious apartment. I don't know. They got used to it. Well, cramped, but no offense. The guy said to her and came up to kiss her again. Lucy didn't mind. She really liked this young man. Let me introduce you to your parents tomorrow. Anthony suggested it. Anthony, it's too early. We've only known each other for 2 days. She laughed, but behind that laugh she hid her fear. She knew that all moms of boys disliked them, the girls. Okay, when you're ready, then we'll go. But I know for a fact that you're my future wife. He pulled her to him again. It was getting late when Anthony got ready to go home. He hugged the girl one more time and walked out of the apartment. Lucy was the happiest she had ever been. The summer was coming to an end. It was time to go out to school again. The supervisor didn't want to let Lucy in, so he offered her to go out at least in the evenings. She agreed. The money was worth it. So, are you ready to meet my folks? Anthony showed up like a normal evening. Well, I guess I am, yeah. She nodded. Let's go then. He gave her his elbow. They moved forward along the sidewalk. Lucy wasn't at all sure what to expect, because the guy never talked about his parents. She was preparing herself to be able to find common ground with adults. They came to the house. It was obvious that not poor people lived here. Why are you frozen? Anthony turned to her. I don't know, I'm scared. She confessed to him. Come on, silly, I'm with you. He took her hand and pulled her with him. The guy opened the door and they went in. Mom, Dad, meet my girlfriend, Lucy. They walked into the room where my father and mother were sitting on the couch in front of the TV. Hello, Lucy. Dad said hello. The mother only nodded her head to indicate that she had heard. It's so nice to meet you. The guest blushed. Let's go to the kitchen for tea. Anthony called everyone. The father immediately stood up, but the mother was still in the hall for some time. So, Lucy, what are you doing? No sooner had the woman passed into the kitchen than she began to ask questions. I study at the same institution as your son, and in the evenings I work at the cafe. She began to tell me. Why, don't your parents have enough money? She was surprised. I don't have any. Lucy confessed. What do you mean? Mother didn't understand. My father left when I was not even 3 years old, and my mother, she died. And how old was she? The woman rounded her eyes. She gave birth to me at 40. Lucy didn't want to say anything more about her mom. Anthony saw this and decided to change the subject. So I introduced you to Lucy, but I didn't introduce you. This is Nancy and this is Harry. He was pointing at Mom and Dad. Nice to meet you, the girl said again. Everyone was sitting at the table, and it was obvious that Mom was not feeling any joy from this acquaintance. Do you know, Lucy, that Anthony hasn't been in the army yet? Why the question? She turned around. If he goes, will you wait for him? Nancy couldn't believe it. Of course, I love your son. Lucy didn't understand what was being asked of her. How long have you two been dating? The father asked a question. A month and a half. Anthony answered instead of the girl. Was not sure about this woman. Sometimes it can be understood at a glance Lucy already did not like being here. It's clear. Nancy defiantly turned away. Mom, I didn't expect this from you. Anthony was ashamed of his parents. Where do you live? Again, my father entered the conversation. I have a room in a communal apartment, replied the girl, and was not ashamed of it. You, of course, I apologize, but son, where did you find this beggar? The mother was frank. Thank you very much for the tea. Lucy jumped up from the table. Wait. Anthony rushed after her. If you leave now, you may not come back, his mother shouted after him. Stay. Lucy asked him to stay. Anthony hugged her and promised that they would meet tomorrow. The girl left the entrance. She walked down the street and tears flowed down her cheeks. Why did they take her in like that? What had she done to them? If a person lives in a communal apartment, he's poor. Where did Anthony's parents get that idea? Her mother lived there all her life, but she wasn't poor. Lucy went into her room, lay down on her bed, and continued to sob. Why did you do that? Ask Anthony at home. As if she had done something to you. She's a good person. I'm not leaving her just because of your whim. He was talking, and he knew it. What are you, blind or something? Look how many normal girls there are around, and you chose this one. She pointed toward the entrance. I saw what I needed to see. While son and his mother were arguing, his father was sitting quietly on the sidelines watching. Anthony, you will not be with this one. She didn't call the girl anything else. Her name is Lucy, in case you've forgotten. He went to his room. Nancy, why do you do that? Her husband came up to her. How? Do you wish this on your son? She looked up at him. They're young. Let them play with love. The man asked. They'll play until they have children, and then we'll dance. She didn't even want to think about it. The woman had a son early, so she didn't want to think about grandchildren. Anthony wrote to Lucy that everything would be all right. The mother would calm down. You don't have to pay attention to her. He came to her the next day, gave her a hug and a kiss. Do you want me to come and see you? He asked her. What would your mother say to that? The girl doubted that the guy would just let go. And I won't ask her. He was cocky. All right, let's wait a while. She suggested it. Okay, just don't cry anymore. The young man pleaded with her. They continued to see each other. Now they went to school together. Things got better closer to Christmas. Anthony invited Lucy back to this house to celebrate the holiday as a family. I don't really want to ruin the holiday for me or your parents. She was ready to cry again. Don't make up anything. I talked to them. They'll be fine. Okay, but if everything happens again, I will never go to your house again and I will not communicate with your parents. She made conditions. Okay. The holiday preparations were in every house. Anthony and his father put a Christmas tree under it and put presents under it on the day of the celebration. He went to get Lucy. Are you ready? He waited for her in the hallway. Yes. She came out of the room, so young and beautiful. They came again to the house where she had been wronged last time. Lucy was quiet. Well, so was Anthony's mother. When they sat down at the table, it was only then that the conversation began to develop. Mama, I think I'm going to move in with Lucy, said the young man. Why would you do that? Nancy said loudly. Nancy, said her husband. What? She turned to him. Keep your voice down. He put his finger to his lip. No, I'm not going to say anything. Just rather than live in a communal flat, let Lucy move in with us. She's at her mercy. Are you okay? Anthony was happy and turned to the girl. I don't know. She was embarrassed. Okay, Lucy, let's not fight and argue. Since he chose you, I don't mind. Nancy said in a calm voice. All right. The girl was okay with that. The party went well. Everyone got presents and was happy. When the chimes struck and the glasses were filled with champagne, Lucy made a wish that she and Anthony would always be well. Will you stay? He asked when his parents went to their room. No, I'm going home. She didn't want to provoke the adults. Okay, come on, I'll walk you home. He got dressed. They walked through the winter city. Here and there people were congratulating each other. Fireworks were going off. They could feel that everything was going well today. Pack your things tomorrow and you're moving in with us, said the guy. Okay. They kissed and the young man went home. The next day he asked his father if they could go get Lucy in the car. Harry did not refuse. Today Anthony and Lucy lived together. Lucy, can you help me in the kitchen? Nancy often asked her. The girl didn't mind. She wanted to offer it herself, but she was afraid to interfere. It seemed as if the relationship between the girl and the woman had mended. But it was only a mirage. Anthony and Lucy were approaching the milestone of their apprenticeship. He had been here 4 years and Lucy only 2 when they had their graduation. The young people learned the unpleasant news that the boy had received a summons. It's all right. A year isn't that long. She kissed him. Lucy, how will you be here? He looked at her face. It's fine. She was as sure of that as she was that she would wait for her lover. Her mother and father were upset when they found out, but they were already being comforted by Anthony while Lucy looked for a job. Everyone else was preparing for the send-off. Lucy got a job at the school. She was now a teacher and was getting ready to recruit her first class by September 1. Not much left to do. A boy said to her at night, Sleep, let's talk tomorrow. She smiled. Anthony didn't show any sign of it, but he was very upset and worried about Lucy. How would she look after his parents? Would she wait for him? But there was no way to change all that. I'll be waiting. She stood and hugged him on the platform. I love you. He didn't want to move away from her, but it had to be done. Anthony climbed into the railroad car, still watching for a long time as Lucy began to move away from him. Nancy, Harry, and Lucy returned home. The girl went to the room where she and Anthony lived. She tried to get out of there less so as not to bother her parents' eyes. And so, Lucy, it had been a month since Anthony had left. They gathered for dinner. It's time for you to move out. What? What are you gonna do with your son out of the house? You'll move out, you'll wait. If things stay the same, you'll come back. That's what Nancy said. All right. Lucy didn't argue with her. She went to her room and started packing her bags. It was sad, but in some ways the girl agreed with Anthony's parents. Except that you should not take offense, and you should not write to your son about it either. The woman asked her, standing on the threshold. No, that's it. It's okay. Lucy walked out of their apartment. Harry offered her a ride, but she refused. The fiance kicked her out, huh? Her roommate met her. No, we're fine. The girl didn't want to talk to her. Yeah, you're here, aren't you? The old lady gloated. Life went on. Lucy worked, wrote to Anthony, and he wrote back. As her mother had predicted her boyfriend, she did not say a word about the fact that she no longer lived with them. Everything was rosy in the letters. In general, it was so, only the beloved was far away. Often Lucy went to the cafe where she used to work. She was pleased that she was remembered there. She would sit and hang out with the girls and tell them how things were going at school. Lucy, the kids and parents praise you so much. The principal told her. Thank you, it's my pleasure. She was embarrassed. We'd hope our partnership will be a long one. He believed it. I'm not going anywhere from you yet. She got nervous, wondering why she'd been called. Lucy, I'm embarrassed to ask you this, but we are asked to allocate a teacher to prepare children who are brought up in kindergarten and preparing to go to the first grade. He spoke slowly. He was waiting for Lucy to say no. Okay, I'll do it. She remembered how she wanted to forgive herself after her mother's death. She took 2 jobs at once. Now the busier she was, the less she thought of Anthony and missed him. She does. I couldn't believe it, man. Yes. She said it again. You have no idea how much you help us out. He started calling somewhere. Lucy gestured that she was going and the principal nodded. She loved working with the kids, so the 2 hours she allotted to the other kids didn't bother her at all. On this day, she left the school and headed to the kindergarten. It was a short walk, so Lucy took her time. She passed by the place where different grandmothers were selling something of their own. In summer, they sold everything that grew in the vegetable garden, and in winter, socks, hats, mittens, and other things. The girl's attention was attracted by a couple of vagrants who sat there begging. "Hey girl, give me some bread." She heard a woman addressing her. "Are you talking to me?" she asked. "There is no one else." She waved her hands. "I'll be right back." She began to search her pockets for change. "What took you so long?" All pulled to her hands. "Vagabond." "Wait." She didn't know why she was so excited. "Lucy." She heard and looked at the old man who was next to the woman. "Yes." She straightened up and froze. How did some dirty grandfather know her name? "You look so much like your mother," said the man to her. "How do you know me?" There was a kind of panic inside. "I used to spend a lot of time with you." The girl saw that her grandfather was about to cry. "Dad?" It was scary to make that assumption. "He is. You must be ashamed to say that word in my direction." He wiped his eyes with the dirty glove that was on his hand. "You didn't tell me you had a daughter. Billa is his companion." "Shut your mitt," snarled at her. "What are you yelling about?" They started a fight. Lucy had no intention of standing here any longer. She moved on. This can't be happening. It just doesn't happen. She felt dizzy. The girl didn't understand anything. She had come to the children. Everything was jumbled up in her head. She couldn't concentrate. "Guys, I'm sorry, but there will be no lesson today." She got up and went to the exit. Back home, she decided to walk down another street so that she would not meet again with those who had brought her to such a state. She came home, sat down at the table, poured herself some tea, and began to think how this could have happened. Why a person who lived a normal life turned into the person she met today. It was a question that had plagued me all my life. In the morning, she went to work as usual. Inside there was still some heaviness on her soul. She decided to go to that place again after school, as she expected to beg for a flight again. "Excuse me." She walked up to them. "Lucy is back." The woman rejoiced. "May I have a word with you?" She looked at Joe. "Sure." He got up and followed her. "But how is that possible?" She looked him over from head to toe. "That's the way it is in life, daughter." He cried again. Lucy saw that the man was no longer young. She felt sorry for him. "Come with me. I'll feed you." She tried to offer help. "No, I don't want to make it difficult for you," he told her. "No, it's no trouble at all." She was willing to do anything. "Do you still live in that communal apartment?" he asked her. "Not you. Mom is no longer in this world." Lucy was sad again. "What a pity, but I'm still being carried by the earth and live a long time." The girl still couldn't believe that this was the person she wanted to know about as a child. "Come on, go already and don't think about me," he said to Lucy. Here she held out a paper bill to him. "Don't." He refused. "Take it, you fool," garbled the woman who had been watching them all this time. "Take it to buy yourself some food." "Okay, thank you. And don't blame yourself and your mother. It's all my fault." He was slurring his words. Lucy walked down the road, thinking about whether or not to tell Anthony. His parents so think that she is a beggar. When they find out who her father is, they will only make sure of it. She didn't write a letter to her lover and cried. She didn't tell him anything and decided she would do it when she met him. Time was flying fast. Now it was summer. Soon it would be fall. Lucy was at work. She was telling the children about the leaves on the trees, how and why they change color. Autumn is also called golden. She said and felt in her gut that someone was looking at her. She looked at the door and Anthony was standing in the doorway. She couldn't believe it. He was like a ghost. "Well, my golden one." He winked at her. "Anthony." She had forgotten that she was in a classroom, that she had a class going on, and there were kids watching. Lucy ran up to him, hugged him tight. "Come on, finish up. I'll wait." He nodded at the kids who were sitting and watching in amazement. Okay, I have one last class, she whispered. Lucy, who's that? Asked one of the girls. That's my fiancé. We haven't seen each other for a long time, said the teacher and blushed. It was not allowed to discuss such topics with children. The lesson was coming to an end. Lucy couldn't wait for the children to hand in their notebooks and leave the classroom. When the last student left, Anthony came in to see her. Hi, sweetheart. He hugged her. Anthony, she snuggled into his chest. That's it. Now we're together forever. He kissed her. Were you even home? She pulled away and looked into his eyes. Of course not. I came straight to you. He started kissing her again. Then run to your parents. They're waiting for you. Okay, you're with me. He took her hand. Lucy didn't mind. They walked through the city. It's so nice here. Everything smells like home, the boy said. I can't believe you're with me again. Her smile never left her face. How are your parents? He asked a question. I don't know. What do you mean you live together? Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. That you two had another fight. What happened? Did they kick you out? Anthony was getting nervous and angry. No, it's okay. I'm really nothing to them. Why do I have to live with your parents? Lucy started making excuses for them. Come on, let's go. He walked faster. No need to fight, please. Let it go as it is, asked the girl. Okay, just for your sake. He softened again and began to smile. They came in. Anthony put his finger to her lips to keep her quiet, then carefully turned the knob. The door opened and they walked into the hallway. The TV was on in the room. Why isn't anyone greeting me? The boy said loudly. Sonny. The mother hurried out. She ran out and started hugging him. Hello. The girl smiled at her. Hi, she said quietly. Mom, you're going to run me over. Anthony laughed. Let's go to the kitchen. I made a pie as I knew I would and made some more dumplings. She called out to the young people. How's it going in here? He sat down on a chair. Everything's fine, only you were missing. Mother was busy. When's father coming? He should be here right away. Mother glanced at the clock on the wall. Before she could say it, the door slammed. Anthony stood in the kitchen doorway. He expected the man to be surprised. Here he is to me. Understatement, and saw the son. They hugged. What a joy, said Harry. Together they sat down at the table. The mother took out wine and champagne and set out large dishes of pie and dumplings. Son, we're so glad it's over and you're home. They drank. Mom, Dad, Lucy, I have a surprise. He looked at the girl. What else have you got planned? Mom knew Anthony liked to do the unexpected. Lucy, will you marry me? He got down on one knee as was his custom and handed her the ring. Anthony. She looked first at Nancy, then at Harry, and said, Yes. We congratulate you. After a brief silence, the man said, he looked at his wife, who almost slid under the table. Yes. She just said yes. Well, wife-to-be, let's go take things apart. He led Lucy into the room when everyone had eaten. Did you tell him? Nancy asked in a whisper as she hesitated in the doorway. No, she answered honestly. Anthony couldn't stay in the room much longer, so after he changed his clothes, the young people went outside. There they spent a lot of time. When they returned, Lucy asked the guy to sit with her on the bench. It would be possible to talk at home after all. He was surprised. I don't want your parents to hear this. She gave him a look that he understood immediately. Okay, what did you want to tell me? Remember I wrote to you that I was asked to work with the older kids in the garden. She looked into his eyes. Of course she did. He didn't understand why he would want to know anything about her work. So one day I was walking there, and Lucy told him all about how she'd met some bums, one of whom turned out to be her father. What? He got off the bench. What difference does that make? She was surprised. Of course not. He sat back down on the bench. Why do you have that reaction then? She wanted to understand him. I don't know, but how could it happen? It just didn't make sense to him. I've been wondering that myself. Lucy confessed. Do you want me to find out? He tried to guess what she was thinking. No, that you just thought you should know who my father was. She looked at the ground and wanted to cry. No need to cry. Anthony realized that and hugged her. I won't. She rested her head on his shoulder. When they got home, they started to discuss where and how they wanted to have the wedding. It turned out that Anthony wanted to invite all his friends and make a big banquet. Lucy, on the other hand, doesn't want it to be noisy. We have to decide. The parents were looking at them. And let's make a holiday in the cafe where Lucy worked. There and the staff is good, and the atmosphere is homely. Anthony turned to his future wife. He thought that she would like this option. Good. It hadn't even occurred to her. That's great. Son, my mother and I have decided that as a gift for our wedding, we will pay all the expenses. The father spoke seriously. Then it's settled. You can take your girlfriends, go shopping, choose a dress. The young man was so happy that soon his life will change everything. The hall was ordered, the dress was bought, the guests were invited. It was only necessary to wait for the happiest day in the life of Anthony and Lucy. Now Anthony had a job. He and Lucy would go to work in the morning and come back in the evening. You know, I always knew I would have a good family, a wife like you. He hugged and kissed his beloved. I should call my aunt to come over. They has left when I was about 5 years old, so I never saw them again. The girl said, I'll do it. The groom-to-be agreed with her on everything. The next day, Lucy called her aunt, her mother's sister, but she said she couldn't come, saying that her health was not the same. The girl, of course, upset, but did not say anything aloud. So we agreed with the head of the hall this ours. Nancy said, I could have done it myself. Lucy knew that she was still remembered there. That's okay. Your head must be full of other things right now. The woman said quietly. She knew that sometimes the emotionality she exuded scared the girl. It's all right. Agreed with her future daughter-in-law. You just don't take offense at me. Nancy sat down and took the girl's hand. What's the matter? I don't hold a grudge anyway. I don't get it, Lucy. Anthony told my father in confidence about your father, asking to know what he was up to. They thought I was in the bathroom at the time, but I'd already come out and heard everything. The woman didn't look at her interlocutor. So, Lucy's insides tensed up. We hired a guard when you have a celebration with your son. They will be on duty at the entrance, so that whoever got there did not pass. She said it with such speed that the girl couldn't understand some of the words. Why? She was surprised. That's the way to do it. Stood up from the couch the woman. All right, let it be so. Lucy sat and watched Anthony's mother leave for the kitchen. She realized that she was thinking to herself now. The girl wanted so much to go away from this place together with her beloved, but for the time being it was impossible. Lucy bought herself a simple dress. She was ashamed to waste other people's money. She had even offered to buy it with her own, but Harry had insisted on giving her the money himself. Are you all set? Anthony asked his bride the night before the wedding. I think so. She listed everything to herself, and it seemed like she had done everything right. She didn't have any real friends. So, co-workers from school, yeah, ex-caves. So everything had to be done on her own. Nancy didn't want to be approached. Nancy didn't even offer to help. Young people, you'll sleep through everything. A woman screamed in the morning. She'd been running around with her husband all morning getting everything ready for the party. Anthony. Lucy jumped up. Did you oversleep? He opened his eyes and looked at her fearfully. Not yet, but we can. She laughed. Okay, I'm ready. And he collapsed back onto the pillow. Get up. She began to tickle him. At first, Lucy wanted Anthony to take her out of the communal room, but Nancy was against it again. The word evoked so many emotions in her, and it was agreed that Anthony would go to a friend's house to get dressed, and right from there, he would come to pick Lucy up from her own house. I love you. He took what he needed and left the apartment. You excited? Almost mother-in-law came into the room. A little. Lucy was putting on her makeup. Let me help you with your hair. She had urged Lucy to go to a beauty salon and have it done, but she wanted to keep her gorgeous hair from falling in big curls. Thank you. The girl looked at her through the mirror. If your son loves and cherishes you so much, then there's a reason for it. The mother finally understood. She brushed and highlighted the bride's hair, then helped with the dress. Lucy put on her shoes and was completely ready. You're so beautiful. Nancy sighed. She remembered how she recently got married herself. Yes, it had been more than 20 years, but it seemed like a blink of an eye. I'm glad I'm in your family, Lucy said with all her heart. Well, they'll be here in a minute. The woman fixed her veil and they left the room. Harry appreciated Lucy too. He whistled when he saw her. The guests were arriving, so the groom arrived. The girls from school had organized a buyback party. Nancy kept looking out the doorway. She couldn't wait to see her son. Why did you have to make up some stupid test? She didn't understand it. Let him suffer before living in happiness and joy, said Lucy with a laugh. Yes, I agree, nodded her mother, and there was a knock on the door and he came in. When Anthony saw Lucy, he couldn't tell if it was her or not. You're gorgeous, he whispered to her. So are you. She kissed him discreetly on the cheek. Everyone went into the hall. A table was set there. They said their parting words. After that, the guests had a little drink, snacks, and drove to the registry office. When they drove up and got out of the car, Anthony offered Lucy to carry her in his arms, but the girl said that it should be done after everything. As they entered the room, she noticed two ragged men sitting on a bench behind some bushes. Lucy's heart beat faster. Could it be that he had dared to come? Then his mother-in-law wouldn't let him in. Anthony, it seems to me that my father is going to attend our party. She voiced her fears to her fiancé. How did you know that? They're sitting over there, behind the bushes. And check what? We don't have to check. Maybe he'll just come over after the registry office. We'll have to give them something. Lucy had the foresight to warn them. I got it. He called the witness and told him everything. He gestured that he understood and stepped aside. The young people stood in front of a woman who told them that today they would become husband and wife, and many more different words. After that, they exchanged rings, and here the groom already took his beloved in his arms, and they left the registry office. Lucy immediately turned her head in the direction where she saw people, but there was no one on the bench. I think I'm getting paranoid. It'll be okay. It's just nerves. He kissed her, set her on the ground, and opened the car door. The young ones went for a ride while the parents and other adults rushed to the cafe. When it was time to drive to the restaurant, everyone arrived on time. Anthony took his bride in his arms again. He wanted to carry her like this for the rest of her life. The mother was greeted on the porch. The bride and groom broke off a loaf. They each gave a piece to the guests and went into the hall. How beautifully all the girls had done. Lucy liked the entourage that was here. Yes, you're right. Anthony was in agreement with his beloved in everything. They took their seats. The guests dispersed. A cheerful host started the event. Everyone drank, ate, had fun. The congratulatory block began. Son. The mother stood in the center of the hall. She was crying. We would like to wish you. After that, there were a lot of admonitions and good words. After them, numerous relatives of Anthony and his friends wished them many things. On Lucy's side, only a few people came out. It was a great shame that the only aunt and that one could not come. When all the words had been said, the host announced a break. It was possible to go outside, to breathe fresh air, and probably at this moment strangers entered the cafe. Well, dear guests, I ask you to take your seats. The host spoke into the microphone. Everyone began to come together. I proposed to fill the glasses. He began to look around and wrinkle his nose. A man in some strange clothes was approaching him. Immediately, the guests smelled this odor and began to shut us up. Can I say something? Asked the man who had just appeared. Who is it? Nancy jumped up from his seat. Calm down. Anthony asked loudly. He didn't want the holiday to be spoiled completely. The boy looked at Lucy. She was sitting all red. Lucy, answer us all. Who is it? She turned to her. Why shout like that? The girl said quietly, Would you like to know who this person is? She asked the guests. Why don't you explain? An aunt spoke up. He's the father of our lovely bride. She's sitting here pretending to be a sheep, but she's trying to get into a rich family, said the woman. What are you saying? The girl got to her feet. Why? If you were born in a garbage dump, your mother was given a room in a communal house for something. Doesn't mean you're not a baker yet. Nancy couldn't stop talking. Nancy, her husband yanked her. Why don't you say something? The other day you were mocking her for having nothing and having nothing. She started taking it out on her husband. Mom, calm down or I'll start screaming. Anthony raised his voice. Yes, of course I need to calm down, giving my son to the bums. Oh, how fair. She laughed a hysterical laugh. Can I say something? They heard the old man's creaky voice. No. The groom's mother looked at him with a hawk's eye. I just want to congratulate my daughter and leave, he asked. Everyone in the hall gasped when they heard this statement. Perhaps some didn't believe what Nancy was saying. So, Lucy stood up from her seat. I want him to talk. Yes, he's my father as it happens, but no one knows his story. Maybe something happened in a man's life to make him like that. No one's immune. It was the first time Nancy had heard Lucy speak loudly. She quieted down a little, sat back down. Come on, let the bum perform at our wedding. Thank you, bride. You've been a big help. She was thinking about her reputation. Daddy, talk. The girl cried. She remembered how as a child she had dreamed that he would come to her and say something. Now her dreams had come true. Just in the wrong place at the wrong time, she stood there looking at this poor man. My name is Joe, and I am indeed the father of this beautiful girl. Homeless man, you, get out of here, screamed the groom's mother. I beg you to listen to me. My mother gave birth to me alone. My father was gone. When I was born, she pulled me as hard as she could, kept me in strictness. I couldn't do anything other kids were allowed to do at school. I did well in school. God forbid to bring home even a B. Of course they were. There were also C's. I was getting and trying to further. He coughed. Give him some water, Lucy asked. The host rushed to the table, took a bottle, and handed it to the man. So, when it was time to serve in the army, I went there with pleasure. Although my mom did everything to keep me out of it, I had a very good time there. Yes, I was beaten, yes, insulted, but it was not what happened at home. I didn't want to go back. No one was waiting there except my mother, and I didn't want to see her. The old man was silent again. She belittled me all my life. Daddy, go on, Lucy insisted. But as it turned out, I was wrong. I was expected. As soon as I arrived in my hometown, the very next day I met a beautiful girl. I fell in love and thought we lived happily ever after. But things didn't turn out the way I expected. Joe looked up at his daughter. Would you like to sit down? She asked. It wouldn't hurt. He turned to look for a chair. And what else? Nancy jumped up again. Shut up. The girl turned and said to her. The girl quieted down. She didn't expect her sister-in-law to be so pushy. Anthony looked at his wife and showed her the class. We've come to meet my mother. I couldn't do without it. No matter how hard Barbara tried to please her mother, she couldn't. She insulted and humiliated her. At first, Annabelle tolerated it, but at some point she couldn't take it anymore. She said so many words to her mother that her mom couldn't stand it. Mom was not the last place in town. She promised Annabelle she'd never get a job anywhere. If she wanted to have a baby with me, she'd never see it. After that, the girl came to me and sent me, unashamedly, far away. He looked at Nancy. Nancy only grimaced. Are you going to tell us your whole biography today? Shouted the same aunt who was supporting her mother-in-law. Listen, you're wondering how I got to this point. After Barbara left, I had my first drink. My mother was tearing her hair out. She begged me not to do it. Tried to threaten me, and what could I do? It made me feel better. I drank, soaked up my grief. And as you know, when you drink, your brain doesn't think about anything and it feels good. When I was walking to the store, I saw her. I wanted to quit drinking and get this girl, so I did. My mother was surprised at my change, but she had no idea why. I started courting, and after a few months we were together with Annabelle this time, and I didn't tell my mother about her. We started living together. I started working as an appliance repairman, but I didn't save her either. After 3 years, my mom found us. She did something I'm still ashamed of. She brought up all of Annabelle's relatives, told them all sorts of things, that everyone turned their backs on her, of course, and she gave up on me. The man cried. God, what a fate for a man. Sighed one of the guests. Why could you keep her? A second one sighed. I did. And you know how? I went to Afghanistan, It was the hottest place there, but I was not afraid because I wanted to be anywhere but next to that woman. Do you know what it was like there? No, no one does. And no one will ever tell you because it was a meat grinder and it was impossible to survive. But I did. I don't know how. He was really crying by now. Daddy, calm down. The bride left the table and went over to him. Stay away. This dress is not worth getting it all over that bum. Nancy jumped up, but Lucy didn't listen to her. She had already gone over to the man and put her arms around him. When the fighting was going on, my friends and coworkers were falling like pillars, and there was nothing I could do. I crawled over to each one, tried to help them, but I couldn't. They were all dead. And then there was an explosion, a ringing in my head in darkness. I thought I was dead, but I wasn't. I woke up in the hospital. I was concussed. They sent me home. As soon as I got out of the hospital, I started pouring what was in front of my eyes again. I remember them all. That's it. You don't need to tell me anymore. Sit down at the table. Lucy looked out into the hall. Many of the guests were crying. If you put him at the table, we'll leave, shouted the mother-in-law. All right. Lucy was impenetrable. No, daughter, I haven't gotten to the point yet. I've been working, drinking and working. My mother ceased to exist for me that day. I don't remember where it was with whom I was celebrating, but I woke up on a bench. Some woman woke me up. It was your mother. He looked up at the girl in the white dress. I understood. Lucy was crying. She remembered how her mother had once said, after her question, that she had found her father on the street, and she hadn't believed her then. When Annabelle told me she was expecting a baby, I thought you were the ray of sunshine in my life and also that you could melt my mother's heart, but it didn't turn out that way. Then I snapped again. The woman kicked me out. I had nowhere else to go. I went back to my mom. She asked for help. I was too lazy to get up. She was dead. I thought a whole different life was about to begin, but as you can see, I lost everything. God had already punished me so much that my child didn't know his father. He stopped talking and stood up. I won't let you go. Lucy took her father's hand and led him to the table. Harry, we're leaving. Let them stay with their relatives, the homeless. The woman took her husband's hand and they left the room. Dad, I insist you join the guests. She looked at Anthony. He too was sitting there like he'd been hit over the head. All right, just somewhere out of the way, Joe agreed. So, you've been like this all these years? One of the guests asked a question. Yes, but I have a daughter today. I have a present for you. He's up again. I don't need anything from you. It's enough that I know all about you. She wanted to get out of her seat again. Sit. He walked toward her and Anthony himself. The groom tensed. To be honest, he too felt bad that some bum was taking up all the time of their wedding reception. Joe walked over to the newlyweds and put the papers and keys on the table. What's this? Lucy didn't understand. No one knew about this. My mother and I used to live in an apartment, but at some point she thought it wasn't enough and bought a bigger one. We moved. I sold it later, as well as a house in the suburbs. I was a fool, but nothing can be changed now. I only found out about the apartment's existence at the notary's office. I figured it would go to my daughter, and now the moment had come. He turned around and walked towards the exit. Anthony and Lucy stood with their mouths open, as did many of the guests. Wait, she shouted, but the man had already gone out. For a few more minutes, everyone sat in silence, digesting the situation. Then the host took the microphone again and began to amuse people. Is it true? Lucy couldn't believe it. She looked at the documents, and it turned out that they now had an apartment practically in the center of the city. Apparently so. Anthony was also in shock after everything that had happened. They weren't much fun anymore, but they made it to the end. Shall we go to my place? Said Lucy, and she didn't want to see her mother-in-law. All right. They went to the very communal apartment. It didn't take long for the mother to arrive. She called at night. Why did you stay with the bums? His mom yelled at him. Calm down. Try to talk calmly, Anthony. No, I want to tell you that after all this happened, I do not want to know you anymore, and you cannot hope. With money, we will no longer help you. She hung up on me. And what now? Looked at her husband, the girl. Everything will be fine, as always, he said and hugged her. Anthony, we will help him, right? She was lying on his chest. Good. He was thinking the same thing. The next day they found Joe, suggested he go to the hospital for a checkup. He refused, but Lucy insisted. It was only then that he said, yes. When they brought him in, the doctors refused to take a dirty bum, so Lucy took him back to her place, the very room where Joe had once lived with her mother. She made her father clean himself up, tried on Anthony's clothes, and they drove back to the clinic. That's it. Listen to what the doctors are going to tell you. Anthony, why don't we go to the apartment that Dad was talking about? She turned to her husband. Let's go. He agreed with her again. They quickly got to the place, and when they walked in, they were aghast. It was really a 2-room apartment. She even had some of the furniture left. How he hadn't blown it, like everything else. He still had something human left. He must have remembered and loved you always. That's what Anthony concluded. I suppose so. Lucy was still in shock. She called her father at the hospital every day to find out how her father was doing. She even thought of leaving him this room in her communal apartment to live somewhere. So what did the doctor say? Anthony wondered. They lived in the room while the apartment was being renovated. He's got a whole bunch of diseases. Lucy wrinkled her nose. And how he's still alive, all those years on the street. Anthony wondered. They never spoke to his mother, and she didn't call either. But Harry, when his wife was out of earshot, found out how the children were doing. Anthony and Lucy hadn't told him anything about the apartment yet. They didn't want their mother to know they were doing well. Okay, Daddy, come on. Anthony said goodbye to him. Lucy, hi. It was Toot. A month went by and Lucy was called to the hospital. She was afraid that she was about to be told the worst. But it turned out that Joe should be arranged for a few months in a specialized sanatorium. The girl agreed. She had to discuss everything with her husband. I don't have that kind of money. Anthony spread his hands. So maybe we could borrow it from your father, Lucy suggested. Okay, tomorrow when he's at work, I'll call him. Anthony was thinking of doing that himself. Once they'd started all this, they had to see it through. The renovations to the apartment were almost finished. Soon they could move in, but they were in no hurry. I've been feeling so bad lately, Lucy complained. She sinfully thought she had caught something from her father. Aren't you expecting a child, madam? Her husband laughed. What do you think so soon? She could not believe it, but she would think about it at the very last moment. But to check yourself, no one forbids you. Okay. She looked at him. The doctors confirmed everything soon. Anthony and Lucy are going to be parents. Let's go to your parents. Maybe they'll forgive us. Don't you feel bad about what my mom said at the wedding? No, she wasn't lying. It was the truth. Why should I resent her? Okay, then, when do we eat? Right now. She smiled. They drove to a familiar house, went up to the floor. Anthony rang the doorbell. His mother opened it. They stood in silence for a long time. I'm sorry. He opened his arms to hug his mother. What, you're tired of living with bums? She was serious. Mom, why would you do that? Anthony made an innocent face. All right, come on in. She let them in and the young men went into the room. Nancy, I'm sorry. Lucy came up to her. I haven't been angry with you for a long time. It's just that my pride didn't allow me to make the first step. The woman confessed and hugged her daughter-in-law. And we have good news. We just have to wait for my father, said Anthony. Okay. The mother-in-law went to the kitchen to put the kettle on. When Harry arrived, he was very surprised that the young couple were their guests. But everything was explained to him and he apologized. What's the news? Standing by the table, the mother. You're going to be a grandmother soon, Lucy said. Oh no, not again. Mom, what are you doing? Anthony didn't understand. That's what you expected me to do. Oh, come on. And they all laughed. Lucy told them that she had put her father in the clinic and he was feeling better, but needed money for a sanatorium. Harry said he would give her the money. Lucy hugged her father-in-law. Come on, we'll show you something else, Anthony said mysteriously. Oh, more surprises. Nancy was surprised. How about it? You haven't seen so much time. Do you know how much we've had time to do? They all loaded up Harry's car and drove to the address Anthony had said. And what house is that? The mother-in-law was tense. You'll see everything now. Anthony winked at his wife. They entered the entranceway, stopped at the apartment. The young man took out his keys and opened it. Son, why did you get into the mortgage? The mother was indignant. No, it was a gift from my father for our wedding. Lucy retorted. You see, he's not exactly a bum. The boy looked at his mother. Yes, he is. She walked over to see that the renovation was almost finished. Well, you guys did good, shook his son's hand Harry. Sure, how could it be any other way? They spent some more time in the apartment discussing where best to put the furniture and allocate space for the baby, and then Nancy invited everyone over. No, we have to go to the hospital, Lucy said. When do you need the money? Asked the man. We'll let you know, the girl said, and they left. The doctor explained everything to them. Lucy confirmed that they agreed to send the man where he needed to go. Why are you bothering with me? Joe asked his daughter. I dreamed of meeting you all my life, and now I can't leave you in the lurch. Stop crying. I'm not dead yet. He touched her hand. I can't. It's involuntary. Anthony and Lucy left. They were back at his parents' house. They sat soulfully at the table with a cup of tea and then insisted on going to their communal apartment. Anthony emphasized that word. Absolutely. Oh, do whatever you want. Mother turned away. Here's the money. Handed Harry an envelope. Thank you. She didn't know how to thank the man. It's okay. You'll get it back. The man grinned. They walked back to the house. They were both happy with the way things had turned out. Yes, of course, we had a wedding no one could wish for. Anthony remembered. Well, enough of this talk. Lucy was lying next to him. Who do you think he's going to be? Stroked her belly. It doesn't matter, as long as he's healthy. She put her hand over his. Yes, if it's a boy, it's Chippy, and if it's a girl. He didn't get a chance to finish. Stop guessing. The scheduled ultrasound is coming up, and they'll tell you if you can't wait. She got up and went to draw the curtains. Lucy didn't sleep well that night. She was spinning around when she fell asleep for a moment. She was having some kind of nightmare. What's the matter with you? Anthony woke up. I don't know. I don't feel right. I can't sleep. She confessed. Does something hurt? He got worried. No, nothing's bothering me at all. It's nothing. It's just nerves. The young man lay down again and instantly fell asleep. And then Lucy was tormented from the morning. She had to go to work in the morning, and she was like a squeezed lemon. Can't you take the day off? Her husband asked her. No, the vacations are coming up. Who will tell the children about the subject? She was sitting in front of the mirror, with bags under her eyes. Okay, then come home and rest at once. He was worried about Lucy. What's there? Have you forgotten that I have to go to the hospital? She looked at her lover. Yes, of course, to everyone but yourself. He kissed her and walked towards the exit. I love you. She shouted at his back. I love you too. She heard herself say. Lucy came to school with no legs to stand on, so she spent all her lessons sitting down. Her old colleagues urged her to go home, but she wanted to finish her work. When the lessons were over, she got up, packed her bag, and headed for the exit. As soon as she stepped out of the classroom, she fainted. Somebody call an ambulance. A technician in the hallway shouted. The ambulance came quickly. Lucy was loaded onto a stretcher and taken to the ward. What's wrong with me? She asked the doctor. It's fine, just overexertion. She sat on her bed. Great, can I get up? She already did. I suggest you spend some more time in bed. The doctor held her hand. Lucy. Anthony came running into the room. It's all right. She sat up and saw that he was nervous. Anthony, I need to talk to you. The medic turned to him. Sure. He realized that he couldn't tell Lucy the whole truth, but he was about to. Not about the baby. He begged him in the hallway. There's nothing wrong with your baby, but there's nothing wrong with the father. The doctor wouldn't look the kid in the eye. What's wrong with Joe? Anthony realized that there was no way Lucy could know if something bad had happened. He passed away tonight. The man spoke quietly. What and how am I supposed to tell my wife that? The young man's eyes were big. so that's why I couldn't sleep last night. Lucy opened the door of the room and came out. Did you hear everything? Her husband walked over to her, not wanting her to faint again. It's all right. She took his hand in hers. The body's in the morgue. You can pick it up there. The doctor walked down the corridor. There was money for the sanatorium, but we'll go to another case. The girl sighed. I know why your father lived so long and nothing took him. Anthony led her back to the room. And why was that? He had to fulfill the last mission of his life, to meet you and give you this gift. The man walked beside her. After these words, they were silent for a long time. We need to tell your parents. I hope now. Nancy won't make a scandal. She's lying down. Yeah, I think so too. And I'll call them right now. He took his cell phone out of his pocket and walked out. The parents took the news well. The body was taken from the morgue. Everything was ready for the funeral procession. Besides Lucy, Anthony, and his parents, there was another woman there. She stood and wept bitterly. If it wasn't for you, I would have lived and lived, and you and your hospitals, she said. What are you talking about? Anthony started to step on her. He wouldn't let anyone hurt his wife with a word. Hush. Lucy stopped him. She's in grief. Everyone threw a handful of earth on the lid. It was Lucy's turn. She hadn't cried. Not until now, but now the tears just came in hailstones. Anthony was afraid she might fall, so he came closer. Goodbye, Papa. I will remember you always. She threw a handful and felt the baby in her belly move for the first time.
Hugh woke up from the loud call of his wife, who reminded him that today was Sunday, and he had promised to help her mother in the vegetable garden. The man grumbled to himself Hugh had completely forgotten about it. All plans to get a good night's sleep instantly collapsed. Hugh thought about whether to send everything to hell right now and turn on the other side and go to bed. But at the same moment, all these thoughts were put aside because he knew his wife Casey, who simply will not leave, and at the same time all the brains will take out all the brains with their lectures. And only he thought about it as his wife came into the bedroom, and from the threshold she spoke in a loud voice. How much can I wake you up? I shout you, but you have no emotions. Get up quickly and go to your mother to dig potatoes. Well, first of all, you called me only once, and secondly, I have not yet had coffee to run and pick the ground, grumpily pronounced the husband. You do not make demagoguery to me now. You volunteered to help your mother. And don't wake up the beast in me, or I won't be responsible for myself, said the woman angrily. Hugh preferred to keep silent because he did not want to start the morning with an altercation, and moreover, he had actually volunteered to help his mother-in-law. He regretted it now, for he would have to shovel instead of sleep. Hugh sighed bitterly and got up. Under the strict gaze of his wife, he went to the bathroom. After that, he hastily drank coffee and left the apartment. The man got into the parked car next to the entrance and drove off. It was a short drive, about 2 hours. Nanny's mother-in-law lived outside the city, in a village, in her own house. The man arrived and was met by KSI's mother with words of reproach. Well, son-in-law, I would rather lie in my coffin than wait for you. Ma, I have 1 day off a week. I wanted to sleep and completely forgot that today I had to come. No, be angry. I'll take care of business. Hugh replied. Thank you. He forgotten. And how do you eat pickles in winter? The woman said sarcastically. Hugh unnoticeably wrinkled his nose as if he had a toothache from this statement of his mother-in-law. Once again, he regretted that he had volunteered to help the woman. Before this, Nanny had managed on her own, along with her husband. Well, the wife's father had died 2 years ago, and the mother-in-law had started complaining to his wife afterward that it was absolutely hard to take care of the vegetable garden. That is why Hugh volunteered to help dig up the potatoes. The man, in order not to continue the conversation, went businesslike to the barn, where he took a tool and headed for the plot. He could hear the landlady muttering in his back. Hugh stuck his phone headphones in his ears and turned on the chanson music radio. To avoid hearing his mother-in-law's annoyed voice, Hugh got to work. He stuck the shovel into the ground and then looked around the site, thinking that this was not a day's work. The man sighed heavily and got to work. He moved slowly. After digging a hole, he carefully took out the potatoes and put them aside. Half an hour had already passed as he labored in the vegetable garden, and the man wanted to take a break, but then he thought that he would finish the row at the end of the plot, and then he would have a smoke. He shoveled deeper and suddenly felt something soft. The man stopped in bewilderment, but then continued his occupation and suddenly saw a familiar coat, which they had given to her grandfather. Hugh sat up momentarily from what he saw. He realized where has his mother-in-law's father disappeared. Anthony. Hugh recoiled from the spot with horror and began to think feverishly what he should do in this case. He immediately made the assumption that his father had been killed by none other than his mother-in-law. The man remembered very well how Nanny had often quarreled with his parents in his time. Initially, Hugh wanted to call his wife and tell her everything, but then he changed his mind and ran headlong to the car. He decided that it was necessary to notify the district police and then let everything go on as it was. The man was already running to the car when he was called by his mother-in-law. "Something you quickly, assistant," completely coped, avoiding in silence. Hugh looked at his relative with fright and only wanted to shout about her evil deeds, but immediately hesitated. He realized that if he admitted that he had seen a terrible find, the woman might re-hide it. So Hugh shouted, "I'll be right back for some mineral water." "Couldn't you drink from the well?" the landlady said grumpily. Hugh did not answer her, but got into the car, started the engine, and drove away from the house. The man felt his hands sweating. He was horrified by his mother-in-law's act and imagined how shocked his wife would be when she found out about it. Soon Hugh was sitting in the office of Barry, the precinct commander, who was annoyed that he had been pulled out of the house on his day off. The man in the pallets listened to the visitor's confused story and could not understand what had happened. The policeman interrupted the speaker with the phrase, "Citizen, I did not understand anything from what was said. Let's go in order. First of all, who are you? And what exactly happened?" Ada Hugh came to help my mother-in-law dig up potatoes and found in the ground the remains of her father. It was she who killed him. I am 100% sure of it. Hugh said, "Well, there we go again. Who's the mother-in-law? Who's the father?" Barry said, "The mother-in-law is Nanny, and her father is Anthony, who disappeared years ago." Hugh blurted out in one breath. The policeman tensed. He remembered the strange disappearance of a villager. Barry squirmed nervously in his chair and thought that the day off was definitely canceled. The man rubbed the bridge of his nose and said, "Okay, I know who you're talking about, but let's start from the beginning with all the details." "Okay, if you say so. Anyway, I met my wife on the street and we started dating. We fell in love, you could say, at first sight, and immediately realized that we couldn't live without each other," Hugh said, and he was immediately interrupted by the policeman. "Wait, and what is your acquaintance with your wife? I'm asking you to tell me how you found the remains of a relative." "What does my wife have to do with this? She's Anthony's granddaughter. I'm telling you everything in detail, just like you asked, so you understand. Am I allowed to go on?" Hugh asked. Barry waved his hand in reply, which meant it was all right to go on, and the man coughed and spoke again. "So, as I said above, my Casey and I fell in love with each other, and I soon proposed marriage to her, and then went with her to matchmake with her parents. There I met all of the bride's family. We were blessed, and within a month, we were officially husband and wife. And soon my Casey became pregnant, and we had our firstborn son, Rocky. We were so happy about it. Let's cut to the chase. The birth of your child is completely irrelevant to this case," the precinct officer said irritably. He already felt that the witness in this case was a tedious man and would take a long time to testify. Meanwhile, Hugh continued, "So I'll cut to the chase. My wife and I went to make her relatives happy. You see, for them it was the first grandchild, and for Anthony, his wife, a great-grandson, and at that moment Anthony's son is missing." "Hugh, I would urge you, please, without all these details. Keep it short and to the point. You begin your narrative from the moment you have dug the ground and do not deviate, or we will sit here for 3 days," Barry said with more irritation. Hugh shrugged his shoulders, but complied with the officer's request and told the gist of how he had found his grandfather's grave. Barry wrote down the statement and let the man sign, then said that they would now go to the place where Anthony's remains had been found. The policeman asked Hugh to tell in a nutshell why he suspected his mother-in-law of the crime. The man happily began to speak. "So that's what I originally started to tell you, that Casey and I are a very friendly family, and we went to show our Rocky to the relatives. Look, you understand, I don't need to tell the saga of your relationship in 2 words." Barry sullenly interrupted his interlocutor. "All right, as you say, but don't ask me later, from what I drew conclusions, why I'm sure that my mother-in-law is to blame. Hugh said angrily and continued. As soon as my son Anthony disappeared, my mother-in-law often began to quarrel with his father, and often they scandalized in front of us by my wife. We witnessed their bickering on many occasions. I told Casey at the time that we should visit them less often, so that Rocky wouldn't hear the rough talk. Barry sighed sorrowfully. After all, everything had been nice and quiet before, and now the investigation would start and the neighborhood investigators would be coming in. The policeman and Hugh drove up to the house where Nanny lived. Barry had already called the investigation team before, and now he called the neighbors to be as witnesses. And now Hugh opens the gate and sees the mother-in-law looking perplexed at the incoming people. The woman rudely says, "How is this to be understood? What an unceremonious intrusion. So, citizen, let's not speak. I received a statement from your relative that he found on your plot the remains of a man who was on the list of missing persons. And I, as a representative of the law, have to check it out." Barry said clearly, then turned to Hugh. "Show me." Hugh, trying not to meet his mother-in-law's gaze, led the policemen and the witnesses to the station. Barry bent over the find. He examined it carefully and then turned to the landlady with a question. "Can you comment on this in any way?" Nanny stood silent, her lips tightly pressed together. It was impossible to discern her emotions from the woman's face. She was staring at the terrible find. The policeman asked his question again, but there was no answer. Barry was not going to retreat and said quietly, "This is your father's coat, Anthony, which was given to him by his granddaughter and son-in-law. It's not worth keeping quiet. Now the investigation team will come and soon everything will be known what happened here. It's just that it's in your best interest to cooperate with us. I'll keep quiet. It's your job to investigate, but for now I need to mind my own business." Nanny said in an indifferent voice and was about to go to her house, but she was stopped by the voice of the police officer. "Now you will stay here like everyone else. At the moment you are a suspect because the found remains are on your territory." Nanny stopped. The woman was not going to say anything in response. She only glanced at her son-in-law, and he immediately looked away. Hugh felt uncomfortable at the moment because he had only recently made a statement about his relative and accused her of a crime, albeit indirectly. Soon the investigating party arrived and immediately did its work. Investigator Harvey interviewed Hugh, then the witnesses, and then turned to the owner of the house. "Nanny, can you explain how your father's remains ended up on your property? We need you to tell us everything without secrecy." "I don't know anything," the woman replied dryly. "Well, then I'll take your recognizance as required by law. Now you are the first on the list of suspects in this case. I can't say anything at the moment, as it is not known how Anthony passed away. It will be known in a few days, but in any case a case will be opened, because the body was not buried according to the law." The investigator spoke. Hugh in the meantime called his wife and told about what had happened. Casey scolded her husband because he informed her last and told her husband to stay there. The woman quickly packed up her son and left for her mother's house in a cab. When she arrived, she found her mother in the house and her husband in the yard. The strangers were gone. Casey lashed out at Hugh. "Why did you call me and tell me right away, but flew to the police station?" "Honey, but I was acting in accordance with the law. Please don't swear or you'll scare your son," the husband said pitifully. "You were a bastard, and you still are. And don't you dare cover yourself with Rocky, he's not around," the woman said angrily and hurried to her mother's house. Casey sat down beside her mother and said quietly, "Why don't you tell me everything?" "I have nothing to tell you." Nanny replied. "Do you have any guesses at all?" asked the daughter. The old woman only shook her head negatively, then said that she would let the investigation be done and asked her to bring her grandson. Casey did not bother her mother with questions, as she knew her parents' temper. If she didn't want to talk, she wouldn't. She went and called Rocky to his grandmother and went to her husband to find out more. Casey asked her spouse questions and Hugh took his time answering. When it came to who might be responsible for the alleged murder, Hugh said who he suspected. The wife only heard about it, as she immediately changed to a raised tone. Casey scolded her spouse with swear words, and at the end of her angry tirade she blurted out, "You're a fool. You're a fool. You put my mother under the article without thinking. You have proof that she is guilty. Now everyone in this village will think she's a criminal. How could you do that to her? Don't you realize she's my own mom? Don't you have any shame?" Casey, but I acted according to the law, my sweetheart. I love you. Forgive my fool. Quietly said the man. No way, the woman said irritably and went to her mother. That day, Casey stayed at her mother's house with a sleepover, as she had another day off the next day. Hugh and Rocky, on the other hand, went home. The man had a work day, and the boy needed to go to practice. The wife immediately told her husband not to tell acquaintances about it. Hugh vowed to his wife to keep quiet about the situation. Casey tried to talk to her mother one more time that day, but the conversation failed. Nanny was unwilling to bring up the subject again. The daughter saw her mother. Something was tormenting her from the inside, and this pain was not physical, but exactly moral. The next day, Casey went to get bread and immediately realized that yesterday's incident had already become the property of the village. The woman saw how the local old ladies at the sight of her immediately shut up and looked at her with a kind of regret. The sales clerk even turned to her with an unexpected phrase. Casey, you grew up here since childhood. How we sympathize with you that you have such a mom. What kind of mom? Casey said, holding back her anger. Don't be silly. Everyone knows each other and the news spreads in a minute. Nani, your mother, is a scandalous woman. Everyone in the neighborhood knows it, but no one expected her to do such a thing. That she would kill her own father. She said it calmly. Who the hell are you to label people? Raising her voice, Casey spoke up and continued. No one has charged her yet, and you're the only righteous judges here. You better watch your families instead of scratching your tongues. Why do you say that? We're worried about you. Though you're like your mother, you're a loudmouth like her. The interlocutor said, offended. Well, don't forget that I can stand up for my mother. Casey ended the conversation angrily and then bought bread and left the store. She wanted to say a lot of nasty things to all the gawkers who looked after her, but the woman restrained herself from such foolishness. Coming to her mother's house, Casey suggested that her relative move in with them, but Nanny refused. The older woman told her daughter not to worry. Casey wanted to talk to her mother again about yesterday, but saw that her mother had guessed her thoughts and made it clear that it was not worth it. Her daughter was leaving for her place in the evening, and on parting, she asked her mother to report everything to her first. Nanny promised her that if there was any news, she would be sure to call and tell her. Casey left with heavy thoughts. She didn't want to leave her mother alone when all the townspeople would be talking about her. But the woman couldn't influence her mother's decision to move in with them for a while. She knew that her mother's temper was willful, and it was very difficult to change her mind about anything. Basically, Casey realized that she was just like her mother because she had inherited her mother's temper. Casey arrived home. She was met in the hallway by her husband, and with a sour look told that they had another trouble. The woman looked at her husband in horror. She could not guess what else might have happened in her absence. Hugh was already realizing that as soon as he reported now and a profanity from his wife would immediately follow. Casey, seeing that her husband was silent, was about to shout what she heard. Son, I broke my leg at practice today. You didn't even bother to call me. No, you really are an asshole. How could you not tell me about this? Where's Rocky? Said Casey and rushed to the children's room. The woman saw her son lying on the bed with a book in his hands. The boy, delighted at his mother's arrival, told her, Mamma, and I have a bandit's bullet, but only it hit my leg. Lord, what is going on in our family? One thing and another and all unhappy events. I probably won't survive it all. With tears in her eyes, said the mother and rushed to hug her son. The woman saw that the boy's leg was already in plaster, so she tried not to touch it. And the son at this time asked, what other sad event happened in our family? The woman wanted to tell about the grandmother, but in a moment she remembered that it should not be done. Casey decided as soon as she learned about yesterday's discovery that the boy will not be involved in this case. The woman stroked her son's head and spoke softly. Nothing else happened. I was just saying that. You better tell me, are you in pain, and how did it happen? It doesn't hurt that much anymore. I'm just not used to having my leg in a cast. What happened was this. Joe and I were at practice, and we decided to jump off the goat on a break. I didn't jump off the goat, and this is the result. Mommy, don't scold Daddy. It wasn't his fault. It was just an accident. An 8-year-old boy said. I won't scold him. You're my only woe, said the mother and kissed her son on the cheek, and then left the room. The woman went to the kitchen, where her husband was sitting, thinking. Casey sat down next to him and looked at her husband carefully. At first, she wanted to vent all her anger on him, but she saw that Hugh was depressed even without her words. The woman lowered her head and said quietly, "What is this black streak in our lives?" "Sweetheart, I don't know. I myself am shocked by all the events that have happened in the last 2 days, and I think that the story with my mother-in-law is only the beginning," answered the husband. "What are you implying now?" said the wife. "You see, I was sitting here, remembering our trip to Nani when your grandfather was still missing. Don't get excited by my words. Just remember how your mother used to fight with your father. I was against our visits, but you insisted on them. And then suddenly my grandfather disappeared, and now he was found in the vegetable garden." The man spoke thoughtfully. "You don't make up anything extra for yourself," he thought, "you see. You know, Turkey, also thought, and where then God. And I'm telling you to shove your memories in the farthest corner of your mind and don't tell anyone about it. How could you even think that my mom could take my dad's life? I didn't expect that from you. And yes, my mom had a fight with my dad, but that doesn't mean she would commit such a horrible crime. And even if mom had a conflict with her father, it means that she had her reasons." The woman said angrily and then paused for a moment and asked more quietly, "Maybe I too, in your opinion, I am also to blame for the disappearance of my grandfather, because I also quarreled with him." "God forbid, I didn't even allow that thought. What are you saying, my sunshine?" With these words, the husband jumped up and hugged his wife. A few days passed and investigator Harvey received the conclusion of experts about the found remains. It became known that the man died from multiple blunt force trauma to the head. Consequently, the man traveled to the township to interview witnesses who knew the deceased. Initially, Harvey visited the police officer and asked him what he knew about Anthony and his family. Barry only said that he could not tell anything special, as he had just taken up his post at that time and had recently settled in the village. The policeman advised him to go and see the Kurt family. They had been family friends at one time. All Barry could tell them was that Anthony's son had drowned. Then the man himself disappeared, and a week later his wife hanged herself. After talking to the district officer, Harvey got into his car and drove to the specified address. The man was met there by an old woman, who immediately understood why the investigator came to her, as she already knew the news about the discovery in the vegetable garden. The grandmother, whose name was Larry, invited the man into the house and businesslike asked, "What exactly do you want to know? I've been told that you were friends with the family, with Anthony's cheetah. Can you tell me what kind of people they are, especially their daughter Nani?" The investigator spoke respectfully. "What to tell about Anthony and his wife? They were a good couple. My husband was friends with Anthony. He would have told you a lot, but he passed away 2 years ago, and I was friends with Nancy." The old woman said, "I'm sorry about your husband. You said Nancy was Anthony's wife. Did I understand you correctly?" The investigator asked. "That's correct, sir. Nancy is Anthony's wife. She gave birth to 2 children by him, a son and a daughter, Noah and Nani. The older one was quiet but a drinker, but the girl was a real badass. It was obvious that she was not the breed of her father's mother, as her parents had a gentle temper. And this is a fire, do not put your finger in your mouth," the old woman said. "Are you talking about Nani?" Harvey asked. "Yes, I am." "Can you tell me more about Anthony's daughter?" asked the investigator. "What about her? All she could take was her throat. I'm telling you, she's not like her parents. Lately, before Nani disappeared, she had a lot of arguments with her father. You should talk to the neighbors. After Nancy's eldest disappeared, I didn't talk to her as much as I used to, because she withdrew into herself, rarely left the house, and I didn't like to visit her because of Nani. However, I have nothing more to tell you, my dear," the old lady said. "Had something happened to Anthony and Nancy's oldest child?" Harvey asked in bewilderment. "Yes, Noah went berry picking and disappeared, but he was soon found drowned in the river. As it was later learned, he had been drinking white wine and decided to take a shortcut home across the river, where there was a rickety bridge. No one had used it for a long time because they were afraid of the rotten planks. Noah took a chance and ended up jumping into the river, and the river is a fast-flowing river, and it was on the eve of fall when we picked cranberries. As a result, his legs cramped, and he couldn't cope with the situation and died. I think it was his own fault. He was a hard drinker, and that's why he died. Nancy was mad with grief. She didn't want to believe that her son was gone." The old woman spoke quietly. "You said that Nancy often fought with her father. May I ask the reason for their disagreement? The man asked the question. I told you that Nanny is a snake. She would only yell. And she doesn't need a reason for that. You should ask her neighbors. Maybe they will say something sensible, said the old woman. Then one more question. Why did Anthony's spouse kill herself? Asked the man. So what is not clear here? Her son drowned, and then her husband disappeared, so poor Nancy couldn't bear it all. The old woman replied. The investigator sat quietly after what he had heard. He thanked the old lady and asked permission to come again if he had any questions. Larry said she was always willing to help if her assistance was needed and escorted the guest out. Harvey walked away from the old lady in thoughtfulness. He had many questions in the case of the dead Anthony, but too few answers. The man decided to initially question the neighbors of the suspect in the crime against her father and then called Nani for questioning. The investigator stopped by the family that lived next door to Nani. A man knocked on the gate. A woman came out and looked at the stranger with a puzzled look. Harvey introduced himself and showed his ID and asked for permission to talk. Agnes, it was Nani's neighbor, carefully studied the document and only then invited the man into the yard with the words, I don't invite you into the house, we can talk here. I don't mind, but do you at least allow me to sit down? With a smile replied the investigator, who was surprised by such behavior of the woman. You do not be surprised that I do not invite you into the house. I just recently had a daughter with an infant came out of the hospital, and we do not need unnecessary infection. The landlady said with pathos. Harvey could not resist the joke and said, So I am in your understanding walking infection? No, I didn't say it right. Aang said with embarrassment and continued, Understand me, it's just that we have a tiny baby at home, and you're from the street, and we've only done the quartzing. Why should I have to justify myself to you? You are not a child after all. The neighbor said cheerfully, recovering from her embarrassment. You're right, Aang, but let's get down to business. I am interested in your neighbors, namely the missing Anthony and his children. The investigator said in a serious voice. The woman sighed and pointed to a bench in the courtyard. Harvey sat down on the bench and waited patiently for the lady of the house to do the same and start talking. Aang sat down and told practically the same story as the old woman he had just visited had told him. But there was something new in the story. The neighbor said that not only the daughter was in conflict with her father, but also the granddaughter was fighting with her grandfather. The investigator, after hearing this, asked a question. You said that the daughter and granddaughter were in conflict with Anthony. Can you be more specific about what the strife between them was about? Nanny seems to be for her mother, but I don't know. I just heard how she was hurling all kinds of foul words at her father, and he, poor guy, just kept silent and asked her to keep her voice down so that his wife wouldn't hear. Anthony loved his wife very much and took care of her, and when their eldest son drowned, he took double care of his wife. But granddaughter Casey was fighting with her grandfather over the house. Anyway, when Anthony's son Noah drowned, the drowned man's hut went to his father. So Casey attacked her grandfather to sell the house and give the proceeds to her. But Anthony was against the idea and said that the house would go to his great-grandson. The old woman said. The investigator scratched the back of his head glumly. He realized that the case would not be easy at all. All the information he received from witnesses is just vague. The man asked one last question. Tell me, did Anthony have any enemies who wanted to take the man's life? God be with you. That man wouldn't hurt a fly. Everyone in the village respected him. He was a decent man. If someone asked him to do something, he would always help and wouldn't even take a cent. People envied Aunt Nisi for having such a docile husband. Many women wanted to have such a man, but he only loved his wife and did not go to the left. Aang said seriously. Harvey was about to leave when the woman grabbed him by the sleeve and whispered, I remember there was a woman who was chasing Anthony, but that's a long time ago. Nanny and I were still in high school. She was a year younger than me. But I can't tell you much about that situation. You'll have to check with Nancy's friend Larry. It was a big story back then. This lady was giving Anthony a hard time and threatened to kill him if he didn't stay with her. The investigator thanked the woman and went outside the gate. He stopped beside the automobile. He was again to talk to the old woman. The man was puzzled by the information received and felt that his head was a mess. But he had no choice but to go to Larry's house again, which he did. The old woman let him in without further ado. Harvey told the purpose of his return visit. The old woman smiled and spoke nonchalantly. I didn't think anyone else would remember this story after all. It's been so many years. Nanny was still in school then. Well, I'll tell you about that case, and you do not stand there. Sit down at the table. I'll treat you to tea with strawberry jam, which you have never tasted before. And don't refuse, or I'll give you an ultimatum. What ultimatum? The investigator asked, perplexed. How unintelligent you are, dear. I will not tell the story if you do not drink tea with me. With a smile replied the old woman, setting the table. Oh, that's what you mean. Well, you've taken the bull by the horns. I give up. Let's try your specialty jam, Harvey said. Soon the old woman began her story. She said that a divorcee came to live in their village, and Anthony helped her to do something around the house. And this woman, Iris, fell in love with him. After that, she did not give a man a pass. Everywhere he fished him out, guarded, and talked about her love for him. However, Anthony was faithful only to his wife, and he was not flattered by the sympathy of this Iris. He told her so directly, but the woman would not be deterred. She even went to Nancy and threatened to put a spell on her. Anthony's wife said nothing in response, only complained to her husband and asked him to keep away from this woman. But the man could not do anything and did not know how to get rid of Iris. This went on for 6 months, and then this woman came to Anthony and publicly declared that she would take revenge for his rejected love. And shortly thereafter, she left the village for good. The investigator listened to the elderly woman's story and asked a question. Did Iris still appear in the village after that? No, nobody saw her again after that. You think Iris sent Anthony to the grave? Nonsense, nonsense, nonsense. It's an old story. I'm telling you, Nanny was still in high school and Casey wasn't around. I mean, that story is over 20 years old, and Anthony's only been missing for 7 years. So you're telling me that Iris has been plotting revenge all these years and only after all this time decided to do what she did all those years ago? That's a load of crap. You never know. Women are unpredictable people. You can expect anything from a woman in love and reject it. Philosophically, replied the investigator. The man stood up, said goodbye to the lady of the house and left. He walked to the car and standing near the car, thought. Harvey decided that he would interview a few more neighbors and that would be enough for today. From another family in Nanny's neighborhood, the investigator heard pretty much the same story he had been told before, but with a small addition. He learned that Anthony's daughter was fighting with her father over her mother. The woman had asked that her own mother be shielded from contact with her great-grandson. The father refused to do so, and there were clashes between the relatives as a result. The only thing that remained a mystery was why Nanny didn't want Nancy to socialize with the great-grandson. Harvey arrived home late in the evening, when his spouse and 10-year-old son were already asleep. The man quietly made his way to the kitchen, where a note from his wife lay on the table that read, "Dinner is in the refrigerator, you'll warm it up. You could have called and warned her that you'd be working so late. I don't want a good night, I resent you." The owner of the apartment, reading the message, involuntarily smiled. He understood perfectly well that his wife was worried about him, and he really did not even deign to call and say that he would be late tonight. Harvey decided that in the morning he would definitely apologize to his wife, and at the moment he would think over the information on the case. The man sat down at his desk, pulled out his notes, and then tore a blank sheet of paper out of his notebook and wrote the word Anthony at the very top. The investigator sat for a few minutes and began to ponder what he had on the case. To make it easier on himself, the man wrote down the names that most figured in the situation. There were only 3 of them, the granddaughter and daughter of the deceased and a certain Iris. Harvey thought long and hard initially over Iris. To find the woman, he realized, would not be difficult, a request to the passport office and the information on his desk. But it seemed to him that this Iris had no part in the decision of Anthony's life. The man was in agreement with the conclusion of the old woman who told the story of unrequited love. What reason would this Iris have to wait for so many years to come and kill Anthony and then bury him in his garden? Although the man doubted the woman's involvement in the case, but this virgin he did not discount. The next on the list of suspects was Casey's granddaughter. She conflicted with her grandfather over the second house, which previously belonged to Anthony's son. Harvey scratched the bridge of his nose nervously. He could not understand whether the granddaughter dared to commit a crime because of a house in the village, which is worth a pittance. The investigator specifically went to look at the house visually. His intuition told him that Casey wasn't involved in this atrocity either. And the third suspect is the victim's daughter. About this woman, the investigator thought more thoroughly. She had a bad reputation in the township. There was a rumor that she was a lady scandalous and often with her father conflicted before his disappearance, and even threatened Anthony that she would exterminate him from the world. Harvey was more inclined to believe that it was Nani's daughter who was the perpetrator of the crime of 7 years ago. But he could not find a concrete motive in this woman to dare to do such a thing and at the same time bury her father in his own garden. The man realized that he had a lot of questions that could only be answered by people from the list of suspects. The investigator was about to put aside a piece of paper and a pen when a thought struck him. Why didn't he take into account Casey's husband, who had found Anthony's remains? If Hugh had acted in concert with his mother-in-law, and then the couple had played a show with the unexpected finding of a missing relative. The investigator added Hugh's name to the list of suspects and only then put down his pen and went to bed. The next day, Harvey made inquiries at the passport office about Iris. As he had suspected, the woman was not involved in the case. Iris, after leaving the settlement, went to the city, where 2 years later she married successfully. Another year later, she and her husband were killed in a car accident. Therefore, Iris could not have committed the crime, because at the time of Anthony's murder, she herself was already resting in the cemetery. The investigator mentally congratulated himself on his good intuition, which did not let him down, and then crossed Iris off the list of suspects. That left 3 people who needed to be questioned. Harvey sent subpoenas to all of them for different times. He decided to question Hugh first. Casey's husband, having received the summons, became nervous. The man could not understand why Hugh would be questioned again. He turned to his wife with this question. "Honey, I can't understand why I'm being summoned. I've already told everything I knew. I'm also being summoned and my mom got a summons. So what if you just tell me again how you were digging potatoes and came across a burial? But I beg you, don't talk about your conclusions about who you think is guilty. You could put my mother in jail with your blabbering." The wife said sternly, "You're right to be summoned, you're Anthony's relatives." Hugh said, and was immediately interrupted by Casey. "Are you out of your mind? My mom and I are related. Who are you? You're not my husband. You're talking nonsense, but you're also a relative. Sweetie, don't get angry, or your blood pressure will skyrocket. You're talking nonsense. Of course, I am also a relative." He said, "Of course I'm a relative too." And now Hugh is sitting in the office of the investigator and again gives testimony. Harvey listened attentively to the visitor and asked a question. "And what was your relationship with the deceased?" "That's a stupid question. We just hung out." "Wait, such questions are asked only when a person is suspected of a crime. You suspect me?" Hugh exclaimed fearfully and jumped up from his chair. The investigator said in reply, "I'm just interviewing you as a witness right now, and I asked you an innocent question, which you were afraid of for some reason. All right, I'll ask you again. Who do you suspect?" "My wife doesn't want me to talk about it, so I won't answer it." Hugh said quietly, "You don't have to answer, but it will look like you know something about the case, but you refuse to give information. In other words, you're covering for the man who committed the crime." The investigator said. Harvey was partly a good psychologist and knew that his words would force Hugh to reveal everything, and the same thing happened at once. The man spoke instantly. "I'm not covering for anyone. I told the police officer that it was my mother-in-law's doing, but he wouldn't listen to me. Nanny had a lot of fights with her father. It's good that you're cooperating with the investigation. Now tell me in essence, what were the conflicts about?" Harvey asked cautiously. "You know, I can't help you there. As soon as I heard that the conversation between my mother-in-law and my father begins in an elevated tone, I immediately left the house. I'm just not a lover of litter. I don't like it when they shout." Hugh replied, "Did your wife argue with your grandfather?" The investigator asked the next question. "My Casey is a calm person. She never quarrels with anyone." Looking at the floor, said the interlocutor, "And I have other information that your calm wife fought with grandfather because of the house, and even have witnesses who can confirm it." With pressure spoke the investigator. "Ah yes, there was once a conflict, completely forgot about it. It was just so long ago. Casey asked her grandfather to give her the house, which used to belong to her uncle. But Anthony was stubborn and wouldn't agree. Grandfather said the house would go to his great-grandson, our son. Anthony, God rest his soul, thought that we would sell that shack and squander the money. But my wife and I wanted to put the money into the business, and that's when Casey had a fight with her grandfather. But it was only a one-time fight." An embarrassed Hugh said, The investigator realized that he would not get any more useful information from the visitor, so he let Hugh go. As soon as the man left the office, Harvey immediately crossed Hugh's name off the list of suspects. The investigator realized that the man who had just left could in no way commit such a vicious act. Meanwhile, Hugh's wife Casey was waiting impatiently for him and immediately began to ask her husband about the conversation at the police station. The husband explained everything thoroughly, withholding only that he told the investigator whom he considered guilty. Hugh did not specifically tell his wife about it because he knew that Casey would start to swear, and he did not want that at all. The investigator sat in his office and thought about the case. He was distracted from his thoughts by a knock on the door. It was a subpoena for Casey. The man invited the woman to sit down and asked her to tell him about her family relations. Casey said that they lived amicably and were shocked that the missing relative was buried in their own vegetable garden. Harvey did not expect another story from the woman, so he asked a direct question. Could your mother have killed her father? What the hell are you talking about? She loved her father, and when her grandfather was lost, she grieved. She even filed a police report herself. Casey replied harshly. Let's not tell each other fairy tales. I know for a fact that you and your mother scandalized Anthony. In fact, your husband confirms it. I have his handwritten statement, so you better be honest with me. That way you'll make my job easier, said the investigator. My grandfather and I had a disagreement about the house. I wanted him to give it to us, and we would sell it, but grandfather's stubborn and refused me, so we quarreled with him. But if you're leading me to believe that I'm responsible for my grandfather's death, it's not true. Despite the fact that he refused my request, I still loved him sincerely and with all my heart. The woman replied, My profession is to suspect everyone. Well, about yourself you told me, and now I want to hear from you a story about the relationship between your mother and father. And at once a request without deceit, as I said above, I have witnessed testimony that Nanny often conflicted with her father. Strictly pronounced the investigator, who was already tired of pulling the truthful information from the woman. I am not aware of their conflicts. I know that there were scandals, but against what background, I do not know. All I can tell you is that my mom fought with my grandfather over my grandmother Nancy. You don't have to ask me why, because I don't really have that information. That's something you can only find out from my mom. But I'll tell you one more thing. My mother is not involved in the crime. She couldn't do it because it was her own father. Casey said calmly, Thank you for telling me everything, and you are free for now. If you have any questions, I'll contact you. The man said. Casey promptly left the police building and hailed a cab. As soon as she arrived home, she saw that her spouse was not yet home from work. The woman freaked out at her husband, as he had laid out his own deductions to the investigator after all. Casey went into her son's room to somehow calm herself down. She asked affectionately about the boy's health. The child replied that he was fine, and just then the woman heard the front door slam. Casey hurriedly followed into the hallway where Hugh was taking off his shoes. The wife began to swear at her husband in a whisper, and the latter listened silently to his beloved. He could not say anything in reply, and Casey became more and more agitated and did not notice how she turned into a loud yell. Hugh endured for 10 minutes, and then he said, Would you mind not yelling so loud? You said Rocky shouldn't know about the grandmother story, and you just laid it all out. I closed the door at my son's house. He can't hear me, especially with his headphones on. Don't you divert the conversation. Do you realize what you've done with your chicken mind? You framed me and my mother. We are now suspected of a terrible crime. The woman said a little more quietly. No, I didn't frame anyone. On the contrary, I defended you. How was I to know that the investigator knows your conflict with your grandfather because of this damned house? He asked me a question, and I answered honestly. Or was I supposed to lie to him? Hugh asked. But you confirmed that my mom had a fight with my grandfather, and you consider her a criminal. Who asked you to talk about that? Pronounced the woman. Casey then went into the kitchen and called her mother. Nanny immediately picked up the phone. The daughter said that she and her husband had been to the police and had given a statement. The parent said that tomorrow she was also going to the investigator on a subpoena. Casey asked her mom, Should I come to your place? Let me take a vacation at my own expense, and Rocky and I will come to you. He broke his leg at practice, by the way. Oh, how did Rocky do that? Oh, that's too bad. Daughter, you better look after your son now. He needs your care. And don't come here. You know what evil tongues can tell him. The old woman said affectionately. The next day, Nanny took a bus to the city. She already knew roughly what she would be asked about. The woman felt an inner excitement, not fear, but anxiety. Soon Nanny was sitting in the office of an investigator who was explaining her rights. The woman listened and then asked the man a direct question. "Do you suspect me?" "There is every reason to believe that you committed the crimes. Many witnesses claim that you repeatedly threatened your father with retribution. Can you explain to me why your father had such a grudge against you that you decided to commit such an act?" The investigator asked a question. "I don't understand you people in uniform. How can people's gossip become a reason for accusation?" The woman said mockingly, "To begin with, it's not gossip, but witnesses' statements, which are signed by them in their own hand, and that's already an evidentiary basis. I would advise you to answer my questions truthfully and to cooperate with the investigation. It will be more profitable for you than to keep silent." Harvey spoke harshly. He already understood from the woman's behavior that it would not be so easy to make her confess. In his mind, the man had already considered her guilty of the crime, but one thought kept him in suspense, namely, why the woman had buried the body in her vegetable garden and then asked him to take the potatoes. She must have known that her daughter's husband would stumble upon the remains, which meant the crime would come out. Nanny was silent for a few moments after the investigator's words, and then she uttered, "I have nothing to confess. I didn't kill anyone. Yes, my father and I had disagreements, but it's a family relationship, and in life things happen. And what people say with their mouths, that's their business. You're a lawyer. Find the real executioner who did this, and leave me and my daughter out of it." Casey didn't do it either. The woman spoke calmly. "You love your daughter, I can see that, and your grandson too, but you're hurting them. We can prove your involvement in the crime. It's just that if you help us, you'll spend less time in jail. Don't you understand that?" Harvey said angrily, "Don't scare me with the time limit. If you think you're guilty, arrest me right now. All I can tell you is that my father went missing a few years ago. I filed a police report, but you never found him. Any more questions for me?" The older woman said with the same sneer, "I've asked you a lot of questions, but I haven't gotten an answer to any of them yet. You're only making things worse for yourself and your family. I do not even know how to explain to you that your silence is a great stupidity on your part," said the man. "If you've run out of questions, I can go. You're right about one thing. I love my daughter, my son-in-law, and Brocky very much," said the woman, rising from her chair. "Go while you're free," the investigator said. Nanny left the office, and only when the door closed behind her did a thought strike Harvey. He realized perfectly well that this woman would not say a word. But the man also realized that the visitor, despite her difficult character, madly loves her family, and only her daughter could make her tell the truth. The man did not guess any more and called Casey. He asked if the woman could drive up to him right now. Casey was surprised by the call and asked why such a hurry was necessary. Harvey didn't say much, but said that he was only calling urgently because of her mother. The woman agreed to come over. Casey, before appearing at the investigator's office, decided to ask her mother about her conversation with the police officer. She tried to call her parent, but she didn't answer the phone. Casey told her husband in a commanding tone of voice to give her a ride to the police station and to go to her mom's house in the meantime. Hugh was not very happy about it. He didn't want to meet with his relative, but he didn't want to contradict his wife. An hour later, Casey was already sitting in the investigator's office, waiting for explanations from him. Harvey did not try the woman's patience and immediately began to speak. "I called you in about your mother. You know very well the character of your mother. She didn't want to say anything. You see, only you can help your mother. I'll make it clear to you. It won't be that hard to prove your mom was involved in the murder. There are too many witness statements that show Nani threatening your father." Here the investigator paused for a moment. He knew he was bluffing now. He didn't have a single signed report that directly stated this, that the woman had threatened the parent. He only knew all of this from neighbors who had shared information, but were completely unwilling to testify officially. Harvey simply, as they say, went va-bank, because only the daughter could talk to the mother and thereby give the case to go ahead and then close it. After a few minutes, the investigator continued. "You see, if you can persuade the mother to confess everything, it will be a confession of guilt, which means that the sentence will be significantly reduced, and then you can appeal." "Are you saying my mom did it?" The woman was horrified. She didn't believe that her mother could do something like that, so she couldn't say the word kill. I am sorry to tell you this, but it is true, the investigator answered. And now she is facing a prison sentence. How are we gonna do this without her? What's an appeal? Question after question was asked by the woman. Okay, first, you guys calm down, Harvey said, handing a glass of water to Casey, and himself mentally praised that the idea about the daughter succeeded. The man saw that the woman was ready to do anything to help her own mother, and as soon as Casey drank the water in a gulp, he continued. There will be time either way. It was a felony. I want your mom to get the minimum sentence. That's why I'm asking you to help me get Nanny to tell the truth. At that moment, Casey's cell phone rang, and she looked questioningly at the hair. The man gestured for her to answer it. The woman picked up the phone and heard her husband's voice saying that he had reached his mother-in-law and she was fine. Hugh said that he would not go to Nanny's house, as she was fine and was coming home right now. The spouse then asked his wife to call his mother as the woman was worried. Casey called her mom back and told her that she was fine as well and added that she would call back later. Harvey had been watching the visitor the entire time. As soon as Casey stopped talking on the phone, he asked a question. Was I able to convince you that you should help your mom? Yes. Trying to hold back tears, the woman replied. Please don't cry. I understand that it is very hard for you now, but you must also realize that now everything depends only on you. Tell me, how soon can you talk to your mom? The investigator asked. I have a working day tomorrow, but I will take some time off and go to my mom. I'll call you as soon as I know anything. But honestly, I just don't know how to convince my mom to tell me, much less you. I think she'd rather go to jail than tell the truth. Casey said in a low voice. Wait, don't get discouraged. I was able to convince you to help your mom. Yes, your parent has a difficult character, but it seems to me that you are a strong-spirited woman and will be able to find an approach to your mother, said the investigator. Okay, I'll think of something. Can I go now? I have a headache from all this, said the woman. I won't keep you any longer. Thank you for responding immediately to my request. I look forward to your call, the man said. Harvey smiled smugly after Casey left. He realized that now the matter would definitely move forward. The man was completely satisfied with himself. Everything was working out as he had planned. Now all he had to do was wait for the woman to give him results. Casey arrived home. She felt depressed. Her spouse came out to meet her and saw his wife quietly taking off her shoes in the hallway. He turned to his wife with a question. Are you all right? You look tired. I will live normally, quietly spoke the spouse. Hugh tensed. He suddenly realized that his wife was completely lost. He had never seen her in such a state. The man rushed to embrace his wife and kissed the face of his beloved. He was frightened, as he did not know what happened to his wife, because Casey never lost her composure. And here a lost woman appeared before him. Hugh asked his wife to tell him everything, but she answered with silence. Casey went to her son's room. The boy lay on the bed and played on the phone. The woman sat down to the boy and quietly asked about his well-being. Rocky replied that he was fine, and then the kid looked at his mom and saw tears rolling down her cheeks. The kid rarely saw his mom crying, so he lifted up from the bed and anxiously said, You are crying, what happened? Mommy, please don't cry. After these words, the woman perked up. She wiped her tears with her sleeve, and then said affectionately that she just remembered her childhood. Rocky immediately asked the question again. Did you have problems as a child? Casey smiled in response. She was amused by her son's question. She reassured the child that in her childhood there was no room for adversity, and she spoke frankly about it, because in fact she grew up in a family where she did not know the place of scandal between parents. Casey was the only child of her parents, and all care and affection went to her completely. The woman patted her son on the head and left the nursery. Casey went into the kitchen, followed by her husband. Hugh forcefully asked his wife what was in the conversation with the investigator. However, the wife did not answer her husband. The woman was simply trying to peel potatoes. The man walked over to the wife and put his arm around her. He was trying to cheer up his spouse. Casey felt for the first time that she needed her husband's support, and she snuggled up to Hugh. The next morning, the woman took time off work. Casey told her husband that she was going to her mother's house to be with her during these difficult days. Hugh did not resist, as he saw that his spouse was in a state of nervous breakdown. Casey asked her spouse to keep an eye on her son's health while she was away. Hugh kissed his wife in response and promised that if there were any troubles, he would let her know right away. Casey arrived at her mother's house as early as lunchtime. Nanny was sitting in the kitchen sullenly crumbling cabbage for pickling. As soon as she saw her daughter, she asked, "Why didn't you warn me? I would have at least made your favorite pies." "Mom, I came here on purpose, so don't be angry, let's just talk. I didn't ask you that often." "Mommy, I need you." And after saying that, Casey started crying. Nanny looked at her daughter and in her throat became a lump, as she could not answer. The woman tried to hold back her emotions and she succeeded. Casey spoke to her mother with tears in her eyes and asked her to tell her mother everything about the past. Nanny looked at her daughter and she was becoming sick at heart. However, she only managed to utter that nothing was her fault and then slowly walked away outside. Casey initially freaked out, but then clearly realized that her mother was even more hurt now, as she was holding everything inside. The daughter couldn't hold back and sobbed with the words, "Mom, you are silent about the past, and after all it concerns us directly, how can you not understand it? Just think that you will be condemned, and I will not be able to tell your grandson clearly what happened to my grandfather and why you were put behind bars." Nanny listened to her daughter in silence and asked a question. "Do you hold me responsible for your grandfather's death? What did you think I should think? I was charged by the investigator that there are many witnesses who say that you threatened to kill him. Ma, I'm just asking you to tell me everything. I know you had a beef with your grandfather." Casey was in tears. Nanny looked at her sobbing daughter and her soul at that moment also suffered, but aloud the woman said rudely, "Go to bed, it's not my fault." Casey stopped crying in a moment, looked at her mother. The daughter looked at her mother for a long time before uttering, but then, overcoming as if some internal barrier, said, "I expected everything from you, but not this. Okay, I don't need you to explain. You just don't realize how much Rocky loves you and can't get enough of you. And I love my son, and I can't take his grandmother away from him. I can't have any more children. Rocky is my only son, and I didn't tell you this, but my husband knows it. So you know I'm going to go and confess instead of you that I took Grandpa's life." Here Casey paused briefly, but literally continued right away. "I know how much you love Rocky, and he loves you. And my son thinks you're perfect, but I can't ruin everything he lives for. Look, Mom, you're his ideal, not me or my husband. Okay, we ended the conversation at this point. What's the point of talking now?" Casey resolutely went to the other room as she heard her mother's voice. "Wait." The daughter hesitantly turned around and saw that her mother had bowed her head and was somehow slumped. Casey rushed to her mother, grabbed her hands and began to shake her, but the woman sat blankly as if she were in a world of her own. Casey continued to shake her mother in fright, and then she called her husband and asked him to call an ambulance. Hugh perplexedly asked why the spouse did not do it herself. However, Casey could not answer unequivocally, but only mumbled that her mother became suddenly ill. And at that moment, while the woman was talking to her spouse, she heard her mom's voice. "Casey, give me some water and no ambulance, I'm fine." "But Mommy, you're white as a sheet right now," the daughter said excitedly. "I'm all right. I ask you one thing, give me a drink and sit next to me," the woman said. Casey in a hurry told her husband not to call an ambulance and hung up the phone and hurried to fulfill her mother's request. She poured water from the kettle into a glass and brought it to her mother and helped her sip it. Nanny drank and said quietly, "Sit down, daughter. I'll tell you everything, and then you judge how to act." Casey froze at her mother's words. She could not believe that her mother, always such a strong-willed and strong woman, now looked like a little delinquent child. Casey sat down next to Nanny and took her hand with the words, "Tell me. And most importantly, know that your daughter will not judge you because she loves you so much. And even if your story is the worst, I will never give up on you." "I know, my dear." The woman spoke softly. Nanny took a few minutes to gather her strength. It was obvious that she was very nervous before she began her story. The woman wrinkled her nose and forced herself to begin the story. She spoke the first lines of the story almost in a whisper, but then it was as if she had drifted into the past. Her voice was calm and steady now, and Casey recognized the truth her mother had kept hidden for years. Nanny's story began with her childhood, that she was her parents' second child. Her mother Nancy had first given birth to her brother Noah when she was 17 years old. Her mother cherished her son very much. He was like a ray of sunshine to her. Anthony also idolized his wife. The man was older than his wife by only 2 years. They lived young soul to soul. When the baby was 2 years old, Nancy decided to go to medical school in the city. Her husband was not against it, and the young woman soon went to the city. But there she had a misfortune. A certain Pope's son liked Nancy, and he began to molest her. Naturally, he was rebuffed, which angered him, as the guy is not used to rejection. And then this scoundrel caught up the young woman with his buddies, dragged her into the car, and did his black deed. He took the girl by force. After that, Nancy went straight home. She didn't want to go to school anymore. At that moment, Nancy even tried to settle accounts with life, but this she was not allowed to do by Anthony, who loved his wife very much. At that moment, the man did not know what happened to his wife, since the girl, when she came home, did not tell anything. The guy only understood that the spouse something happened there. As she became withdrawn only because of this, Anthony tried to be with his beloved more often alone. And when Nancy almost decided herself a life, the spouse made her tell him everything. As soon as the husband learned the truth, he wanted to go to the city to punish the offenders, but then the spouse pleaded. She begged Anthony to give up his idea for her. The woman was afraid for the fate of her husband. Nancy was able to persuade her spouse to give up revenge. The young family continued to live on, but then the woman realized that she became pregnant and overnight hated the one who was in her belly. Nancy believed that this child was from a rapist. The girl hated herself for this pregnancy. Anthony, on the other hand, was happy about the pregnancy and told his spouse, "Throw away the idea that this baby is the child of a rapist. This is my baby in you, and don't you dare get rid of it." At this point, Nanny paused in her story and looked expressively at her daughter, who was listening breathlessly to her mother. Casey quietly asked her mother, "So grandfather is not your real father?" "There's no way to know that anymore. You can do a DNA test now, but there was no DNA test back then. But I can tell you, my daughter, that Anthony is my real father because he put his soul into me. He even took the place of my mom sometimes, and it's very rare for fathers to love their children so much. It even seemed to me sometimes that he loved me more than his firstborn son. Mammy, you are telling me such passions, but go on." Casey said excitedly, and her mother began to tell the story. From the woman's story, it became clear that soon Nancy gave birth to a baby girl who was named Nani. Anthony rejoiced at the birth of his daughter, but his wife treated the child with dislike. Only after a few years, the woman was able to change her attitude to the girl. Time passed, and Nanny was already in the 10th grade, and her brother graduated from high school. Nancy treated her daughter evenly, but cherished her son. The girl felt it, but her mother was not offended at all. She often heard her father say, "You know, daughter, that mom loved you." "I know, Betty," Nanny answered, and then an unpleasant incident happened in their lives. A woman named Iris came to the village and asked Anthony for help. Iris needed her porch subdued, and the man agreed. He rarely refused to help at all if he was approached, and the woman fell in love with Anthony. She didn't care at all that the man was married and had 2 children. Iris did not give the man a pass. She would wait for him after work to tell him how she felt. Nanny often saw the woman outside her house. Once she witnessed how Iris threatened her father in front of neighbors that if he did not leave his wife and children, she would take his life. The girl was then very frightened for her father. However, the father reassured his daughter that the woman was only scaring and would not actually do anything. At that time, Nanny wanted to go to this Iris and ask her not to persecute her dad anymore, and only the girl was about to do it, as she learned that the woman had left the village for the city. That's when Nanny realized that her father madly loves her mother and is willing to do anything for her sake. And soon the girl herself fell in love with a guy who had just come from the army. His name was Arnie. He was a broad-shouldered young man with a dazzling smile. Nanny immediately realized that this guy would be hers and no one else's. And so it was. The wedding was played right after the girl graduated from school. At that time, she was already pregnant. Anthony was very happy that the daughter found her female happiness, which could not be said about the son, no. The guy had already managed to marry and divorce once. A year later, Nancy blamed her husband for the failure of her son's marriage. Anthony then wondered why he was to blame for the fact that Noah's family life did not work out. That's when the wife blurted out, "You're ready to blow dust over your daughter, but you're forgetting about your son. How can Noah live with his wife? With us? He should feel like a master in this house, not a lackey." "Oh, honey, you're being silly. Did I reproach him with a single word that he is a spunger?" Anthony asked, perplexed. Don't you understand anything? A guy should bring his wife to his own house, but not to his parents' house. Where did Noah bring his spouse? Nancy replied, "All right, honey, I hear you. So we'll take him home and let him live apart from us and make his own life. Would that be all right with you?" Calmly said the husband, and Anthony, not to throw words to the wind, soon bought a small house on the outskirts of the sun. Noah moved away from his parents, but Nanny brought her husband to her father's house. After a while, the young woman gave birth to a daughter, which she and her husband by mutual consent named Casey. Nanny, after the birth of the baby, decided that she and her husband will have only one child in the family. This decision was due to the fact that although she did not resent her mother for her cold attitude to her, but still jealous of her brother, Nanny simply lacked her mother's attention, and so the woman did not want her daughter to be deprived of maternal attention. The girl naively believed that if another baby appeared in their house, you would be neglected. At that time, Nanny did not know why her mother treated her like that. When Casey turned 7 years old, her uncle married for the second time. Nanny was happy for her brother, and Noah's mother was especially jubilant. Nancy seemed to blossom. Many people who knew her remarked that the woman seemed 10 years younger after her son's wedding. Nanny was saddened then that her mother did not rejoice like that, even when she had a child. Time moved on immediately. Nanny and her husband raised their daughter. Anthony enjoyed fiddling with his granddaughter and often chuckled when he said, "You, Nanny, are all in your mother's speed, that she gave birth early and got married, so you are the same way. Oh, and my granddaughter will be in your female line and will also soon reward me with a great-granddaughter." "Father, don't talk nonsense, it's too early to talk about it," laughingly replied the daughter. "It's not too early, you'll remember my words later. You know how fast time flies. I thought I'd just gotten together with Nancy, and now I've already got a granddaughter." Anthony replied admonitively, then added, "Noah's in no hurry to give us kids, and it's about time." Nancy was also sad that her eldest son had not yet had his firstborn. The woman often lamented about it, but soon Noah upset his mother even more. He announced that he was divorcing his wife, and it was already a final decision. Nancy, when she heard the news, immediately sank. She could not understand why the quiet and calm son did not have a family life, and at Nanny everything on the contrary turned out smoothly and well. Noah, soon after the divorce, began to addicted to whitewash. His mother tried to influence her son, but he only listened to her in silence and promised that tomorrow he would no longer go to the store and would not buy a hot drink. However, these were empty promises. The very next day the man went home with a bottle of white water, and by evening he slept a deep sleep. Anthony also repeatedly told Noah that he was slipping into the abyss and it was time to stop. But the son answered him the same way as his mother and only fed him breakfast, that the next day he would stop his addiction. And Nanny tried to reason with her brother, but her attempts were in vain. Noah continued to drink. The years went by. Nanny's daughter grew up, and she married a sloppy guy named Hugh. As Anthony predicted, the granddaughter also gave birth early. She had just turned 18 at the time of the baby's birth. Casey did not stay to live in the village, but moved to the city, where the young man's parents gave them a one-room apartment, which they later exchanged for a two-room apartment. Here Nanny paused again in her narration. Tears appeared in the woman's eyes. She turned away from her daughter, who was listening to her. Casey jumped up and hugged her mom with the words, "I realize that it is hard for you to remember everything, but understand that if you started to tell me your fate, then tell it all the way to the beginning. I need to know everything, because you've kept it all to yourself for so many years. And believe me, Mommy, I'm with you no matter what you hear. Now, daughter, I'll continue. Just let me calm down a little. I'll tell you everything and I won't hide anything. You're right. If I started confessing, as they say, then I will go to the very end," her mother said sadly, and after a while she went on with her story. Casey listened to her mother attentively, for soon she would have to find out what had made her parent dare to kill her father, whom she loved very much. However, the subsequent story threw Casey into a concrete shock. This was not at all what the young woman had expected to hear. Meanwhile, Nanny continued her narrative. When Casey and Hugh had their firstborn son Rocky, the young family went to visit the young woman's parents when the baby was 6 months old. Nanny's spouse rejoiced at this event, as not said, and also was delighted grandfather and grandmother, because now they have a grandson. Nancy's great-grandmother was delighted with the baby, but one circumstance prevented her from being completely happy about the boy. The old woman was concerned about the long absence of her son Noah, who had gone out for berries and was not there for the second day. At home, Nancy could not find a place for herself. She repeatedly told her husband that their son was in trouble and needed to act. Anthony reassured his wife, saying that Noah had spent the night in the woods before, but she did not want to hear anything about it. On the third day, Noah's father went to the police station to file a report on his son's disappearance. However, Anthony was given the answer that the report is accepted on the third day after the disappearance of a person. Nancy, upon hearing this, howled. She asked her spouse to go to the woods and search for their boy. Anthony realized that his wife would not leave him, and so he went with his daughter's husband to search for their son. The men spent the entire day in the woods. They shouted Noah's name loudly, but all they got in response was the sound of echoes. When it got dark, Anthony and his son-in-law returned home, where they saw Nancy looking out for them. As soon as the woman saw the silhouettes of only 3 men, she howled again. She realized that her son was not among those who had come. The next day, Anthony again visited the district police officer, who took a missing persons report. The search began. The search for Noah began. The township also participated in the search, but there were no results. Nancy was going mad with grief. Her daughter and granddaughter tried to support her, but the woman brushed them off. Soon Casey and her husband and son left, as they could not stay and see their grandmother suffer. Nanny promised her daughter, as soon as it was known what was wrong with her uncle, she would let her know immediately. Noah's body was found a week later by a local fisherman in a river near the shore. The man immediately reported it to the district police officer. An identification followed. Nancy, looking at the dead man, immediately fainted. Anthony rushed to his wife. The man had already identified his son. He was worried about his wife at the moment, as Noah could no longer help. Claudia, when she came to herself, flatly refused to recognize that the body of the morgue is her son. Soon the funeral was held, but the mother of the deceased was not at the event, as she had been hospitalized with a heart attack the day before. After discharge, Nancy never went to the cemetery. The woman still did not believe that her son had drowned while drinking. Nanny fell silent again and looked away with an alienated stare. Casey carefully sat down next to her and said quietly, "Mommy, I understand that you're coming to the end of this story now, and it's hard for you to talk, but I really want to know the whole truth. Please don't bore me. For me today, everything I say is a terrible memory." Almost in a whisper, my mother said and continued, "You know very well how your uncle died. I told you about it." "Yes, I remember," quietly answered the daughter. So, from that moment the horror of our lives began. My mother did not believe that her son drowned, and Peter Bezrukov by his own fault. If he had not consumed whitewater, then this would not have happened. But it's already in the past and nothing can be changed now. So, the mother did not believe in the death of her son, and every day went to Noah's house and carried him prepared food. She was waiting for him. Initially, my dad and I thought it was the first shock of the morning and it would soon pass. However, it had been a month since Noah's death, and she still kept going to his house and carrying either a can of soup or a plate of fried potatoes. That's when I sounded the alarm that my mom was out of her mind and told my dad about it. He agreed with me that something strange was going on with my wife. The two of us tried to talk her into seeing a specialist, but she refused. So Dad started locking Mom up at home so she couldn't go to Noah again. And you also remember that you often came to visit us then or even 3 times a month to visit us. And that's when I started to notice more strange behavior in my mother. As soon as she saw your son and my grandson, she was transformed. A smile appeared on her face. Her eyes shone with joy. I then, thought that my mother was recovering from the loss of Noah, but I was wrong, and dramatically so. One thing that helped me figure it out was when I left Rocky to babysit for a while. You were out with your husband at the time, and we were left with the baby. And I don't remember what I was doing, so I asked my mother to watch Rocky. She was more than happy to do it. Anyway, I went away for a while. And when I came back and saw the mother marking the baby's eye with a needle with the words, "You're gonna give me my Noah back," I was horrified. I didn't tell you this because I was afraid that you wouldn't come to us anymore after that. I don't really remember what happened. I just jumped up to my mother and grabbed the needle, and then I took Rocky. I told my dad all this, but he didn't believe me. I tried to talk to my mom, and she smiled at me and apologized. And I believed her then. I thought maybe I didn't understand the situation. But then there was another moment when I realized for sure that Mom could hurt the baby. You arrived the day before Rocky was due to turn one. Do you, remember that visit? Nanny asked her daughter a question. How could I not forget? Because it was then that our son pricked his little finger with a needle, and then we could not calm him down for a long time. And then you and your grandfather had a scandal. But I don't know the reason, because I was busy with my son and didn't listen to you. Casey replied, That's right. That's when I caught my mother with Rocky again. You yourself then gave him to the great-grandmother to take a walk with your husband. It wasn't the baby that got pricked with the needle, it was my mother. I saw it with my own eyes. That's when I made a scene with my father. I was afraid that my own mother might hurt my grandson, whom I love more than life. Then again, I didn't tell you anything about the incident because I was afraid. Of what? I've already told you before. After that, my father and I began to quarrel about it often. I asked him to keep Rocky away from me when I wasn't home. And then I begged him to put my mom in the hospital because I could see that she was becoming unhinged. Mom could leave all the gas burners on and go to her room. I repeatedly told my father that we were in danger, but he did not want to hear me. Here Nanny paused and immediately heard her daughter's question. Is that why you killed him? No, my joy, I didn't. With a forced smile, the woman spoke and continued. One day my father just didn't come home from the store. I ran through everyone I knew with my husband, but no one had seen Dad. I asked my mom if Dad was definitely going to the store. She told me he was. Eventually, a couple more days passed, and Dad was still gone. I filed a missing persons report with the district police, and the same day my husband had a nervous stroke and was hospitalized. Several days passed, and my father could not be found. And then I smelled the stench in the house. I went through all the rooms and found nothing spoiled. I was perplexed. I started going around the house again when I realized that the smell was coming from my parents' room. I went in there. My mother was sitting on the couch looking indifferent. I asked her if she smelled a foul odor, and she pointed to the closet with the words, That's where my Rocky comes to life. I rushed over there, and there was my father's body, and next to it a hammer with brown stains on it. It wasn't hard to figure out that what had happened was my mom had killed my dad. I grabbed the hammer in a daze and pressed it to my chest, and then I ran out of the house into the yard. The rest I vaguely remember. I sank to the ground and sobbed. How long the hysteria lasted, I don't know. Here Nanny stopped in her narrative and burst into tears. Casey rushed to hug her mother, begging her to calm down. The daughter herself could not hold back her tears, for she had just learned a terrible secret that her mother had kept to herself for so many years without telling anyone. Nanny kissed her daughter gratefully and asked if she should go on or not. Casey responded with an approving nod, still holding her mother's hand in hers. As soon as my hysteria passed, I returned to the house, where I saw my mother hanging from a rope and a note lying on the floor that read, My daughter killed my husband and forced me out of her life. And in that moment I realized that my whole life was over overnight. After all, there is a hammer on which the last of my fingerprints, and there is also another physical evidence and note that clearly states that I am the killer. In one day I lost two parents at once, my father and mother. I had no one to go to for advice. I was frightened and chaotically searched for a way out, but could not find it. I realized that I had to do something, but I didn't know what to do. And then I decided that my father should be buried, and I couldn't think of a better place to bury him. That's why she decided that he should lie on his own land, even on his vegetable garden. I waited until evening and dug a shallow grave at the end of the plot, and therein buried my favorite daddy. And only after that she called the district police officer, who called the medics. They stated that Mom had committed suicide. Naturally, I hid the note, as well as the hammer. That's how it happened. I didn't want to go to jail for something I didn't do. I was so afraid of being separated from you. You know how much I love you. I may be a scandalous woman, but you're the most precious thing in the world to me. I know I'm guilty before the law, but honestly, I don't know why, because I didn't take anyone's life. And I couldn't frame my mother either, even though she killed her husband. After all, my father and I hid from everyone until the last day that my mother went crazy over the death of her beloved son. I knew very well how my father loved my mother, and I can even assume that if he had known that he would die at the hands of his own wife, he would have punished me in no way, so that people would not know that she had done it. You see, daughter, I'm sure of it, and I've never dreamt about Daddy, which means I haven't offended him by my actions. After all, as they say, if the deceased is dreaming, it means that they have done him badly, and he reminds about himself in night dreams. Nanny said and burst into tears again. Casey looked at her mom with wide open eyes, It seemed to her that it was all unreal. She didn't know what words to use to comfort her mother. Casey wished she could help her mother now, but nothing came to mind to ease her mother's state of mind. All the young woman could find to say was this: "Mommy, just now you have lifted a heavy weight from your soul, and you are not to blame for anything. You did what you thought was right, you didn't commit a crime, but here's your mom's fault. You can take offense at me for saying that, but I said what I think at the moment. Daughter, 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 remember, a mom is the mom, no matter what kind of mom she is. I love my mom and your grandmother a lot. She gave me life, and only thanks to her I was able to experience love for a man, for your father, to know motherhood. And if she hadn't given birth to me, I wouldn't have experienced any of this in my life. So don't blame Grandma for anything. She lost her mind when she lost her son. And I can't blame her for loving me less, because she was abused and her mother was morally traumatized." The woman spoke softly. Casey thought about her mother's words and suddenly realized that Nanny was completely right. The young woman sat silent for a while, and then asked her mother to go with her to the investigator tomorrow and tell her everything without secrecy. Nanny was reluctant at first, but her daughter persisted. The mother could not stand it and gave Casey a promise that the next day she would definitely go to the police to testify. But only the woman agreed on everything when suddenly the daughter asked a question. "Mommy, where did you put that hammer? This note?" "I kept it all, wrapped the hammer in a kerchief and hid it in a secluded place, just like the note," Nanny answered. "And one more question. Did my father know about all this?" asked the young woman mother. "No, he didn't. I didn't want to worry your father, because he was in the hospital. His health was important to me at that moment, so I didn't tell him anything," the woman said. "Mom, you've been through so much, and you've got it all in you. You are very strong, and I love you," said the daughter with tears in her eyes. Casey, after talking to her mother, went outside, where she immediately called the investigator and said that tomorrow together with her mother they would come to him. The young woman asked only one favor, that her mother testify in her presence. Harvey did not refuse the request and agreed. The next day, the mother and daughter were already on the bus to town. The women did not talk to each other, as each thought about his own. Casey dreamed that everything would be over soon and her mother would be all right. And Nanny wondered if she had done the right thing by revealing the secret she had hidden for so many years. But she already knew the answer to her own question. After a while, the two women entered the investigator's office. The man pointed to a chair, inviting the visitors to sit down, and was the first to speak. "I am glad that you, Nanny, have decided to cooperate with us. Let's you initially state everything, and then I will write down everything from your words. Thank my daughter. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't be here. All right, let's get down to business. My story's not 5 minutes long." The woman was rude. "You're in your repertoire, putting out the barbs." The investigator replied with a smile, and then Casey intervened in the conversation and turned to the man. "I ask you very much to listen to my mother from the beginning, as I did yesterday. It's very important. It's the only way you'll understand everything." "Agreed," the investigator said and looked questioningly at the young woman's mother. Nanny looked out the window and then at the man and began to tell her story slowly. The woman did not rush her narrative. She paused briefly during the course of her story. The investigator did not push her. Occasionally the man rubbed the bridge of his nose. And when it came to the moment when Nancy had killed her husband, Harvey got up from his chair and walked around the office. It was not at all what the man had expected to hear, and in general, the woman's story shook him to the core. He sat down again, and Nanny continued talking, and soon the woman finished telling the whole story. There was silence in the office. The investigator realized that his intuition had failed him about the suspect. He was also shaken by the story itself. Harvey, after a while, asked the woman a question that he was very interested in after what he had heard. "You buried your father in your vegetable garden and called your son-in-law to dig potatoes, but you were well aware that he could dig a little deeper and find the remains. So why did you call your son-in-law for help? You understand why I'm asking you this question, don't you?" "I'm not a little girl, of course I do. You're implying that I knew my son-in-law would stumble upon the grave. I'll answer that I knew, and I'll even say that I wanted to. And I'll tell you why. I wanted to give my father a proper burial, so my grandson could visit him like my daughter at the cemetery. You'll be satisfied with that answer." The woman said quietly, "Yes, now everything you said will be checked by the investigation. I understood perfectly well that you told the whole truth, and you are not guilty of anything. And also, you have a difficult fate. I'm sorry I suspected you of committing a crime. I was wrong, but understand, my job is to suspect and check the facts. The investigator said quietly. I understand you. Don't worry about it. Nanny replied. Both women left the office. The daughter persuaded her mother to move in for a while, and Nanny did not refuse, as she felt that she could not stay alone after everything. Soon there was a reburial of the dead man. Anthony was buried next to the spouse he loved. Nanny came to the gravesite and sat down on a bench and quietly said, Well, Daddy, I've given you a proper burial. I'm sorry for the way things turned out, but know that I'm not mad at Mommy. I know how much you loved her, and I loved her. Your great-grandson, as soon as he takes off the cast, he will come with his parents to visit you. Thank you, my dear, for your care and the sense of love you made me realize in this life. Maybe I'm rambling, but this is from the bottom of my heart. I love you and Mom very much.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.